By the time Ruth Mercer understood that her sons had come to sell the orchard, Mark had already photographed the dining room from 3 angles. Daniel stood at the kitchen counter with a cardboard carrier of coffee and said, "We're trying to make this easy on you, Mom." Outside the window, 90 tons of apples hung green and red beneath a September sky. Some branches bowed so low their leaves brushed the grass. Frank had been dead 22 days. Ruth looked at the boxes stacked by the mudroom. "Bedroom," one said in Daniel's square handwriting. "Donate, papers." Mark had brought blue tape, black markers, and the brisk expression he wore when an airline canceled his flight. "When is the broker coming?" she asked. Neither son answered quickly enough. "Friday," Daniel said at last, "just to look." Mark lowered his phone. "We're not agreeing to anything Friday. You already agreed I'd be here. It's your house." Ruth folded the dish towel she had been holding. She folded it again, making a thick white square no bigger than her palm. "This orchard will not be sold before the harvest." Mark glanced toward Daniel. There it was, the look people exchange beside a sickbed, when the patient said something they had decided not to believe. Daniel reached for her shoulder. Ruth stepped aside. The coffee was from the gas station outside town, where Frank had gone every morning for 31 years and complained every morning that the coffee tasted burned. Daniel had remembered her order, 1 cream, no sugar. That small kindness annoyed her more than if he had forgotten. She took the cup anyway. Mark put his phone into his shirt pocket. "Nobody said the bulldozers were coming tomorrow. You brought boxes? For Dad's things?" "One says kitchen. That's for things you don't use." "I use the kitchen." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. At 52, he had Frank's heavy brow and Ruth's habit of pressing his tongue against the inside of his cheek when he wanted to say something unkind. "Could we not start this way? You started without me. I'm catching up." The refrigerator hummed behind them. On its door, a magnet from an insurance company held Frank's last handwritten list. Diesel, shear pins, aspirin, call Elena. His writing weakened toward the bottom until the final letters seemed to slide downhill. Ruth had not moved the list. She had not moved his cap from its hook either. She had moved his boots after tripping over them the morning after the funeral, then cried because the mud they left on the porch had already dried. Mark crossed to the window. He was 47, leaner than Daniel, with expensive-looking glasses and a frayed cuff he kept tugging beneath his jacket sleeve. "Mom, even if you want to stay through winter, there's no reason to put money into picking this crop. The numbers don't work." "What numbers?" He hesitated. "The ones you have," Ruth said. "We've been looking at what similar acreage sells for." "Similar acreage where?" "Around here. Apple acreage, land is land to a buyer." Ruth turned her coffee cup slowly between both hands. "Not to an apple tree." Mark gave a short breath that might have been a laugh if anyone else had made it. "That right there is what worries me." "What, botany?" Daniel pulled out a kitchen chair. He did not sit in it. "Mom, listen, nobody's trying to throw you out. We're talking about getting the property valued, seeing what's realistic, and finding you something manageable. Manageable for whom? For you. You don't know what I manage." Both men went quiet. The cruelty of it surprised even Ruth. Daniel had spent the final night in the hospital with her. He had slept bent in a vinyl chair with Frank's windbreaker rolled beneath his neck. Mark had driven 4 hours in the rain and reached the room 11 minutes too late. Ruth knew because he had asked the nurse what time it happened, then checked his watch as if those minutes were a distance he might drive backward. She set down her coffee. "Did either of you eat?" Mark looked almost offended. "Mom, there's ham." "We're not hungry," Daniel said. "You brought gas station coffee and empty boxes at 8 in the morning. That's not a meal. That's a raid." For 1 second, Daniel's mouth twitched. It vanished when Mark looked at him. Ruth opened the refrigerator and took out the ham. She did not need breakfast, but slicing gave her hands work. The electric knife was in the drawer beside the stove. Frank had bought it in 1998 and sharpened its blades as if it were farm machinery. The cord had been repaired twice with black tape. Daniel took plates from the cabinet without being asked. Mark remained by the window. "How much do you think is out there?" Daniel asked. 85 to 90 tons, if the Rome block hasn't dropped more than I saw yesterday." Mark turned. "You were in the Rome block yesterday?" "I walked there. Alone? Unless you count the deer. That's nearly a mile. It was nearly a mile last year, too." Daniel placed 3 plates on the table. Dad said the west rows were in bad shape. Frank said anything he didn't feel like fixing was in bad shape. The sentence came out with the ease of an old marital joke. No one laughed. Ruth laid ham on the plates and added slices of bread. She knew what Daniel saw when he looked at her: the loose skin beneath her jaw, the blue vein raised along her left hand, the careful way she turned instead of twisting at the waist. He did not see her checking oil at dawn, because Frank's fingers could no longer grip the dipstick. He had never watched her stand in the packing shed with a pencil between her teeth, sorting invoices while a storm shook the tin roof. That had been the arrangement. Frank did the work people could see. Ruth made sure it had happened. Mark finally sat down. What happens if you fall out there? What happens if you fall in Milwaukee? I call somebody. So do I. Who? Ruth slid his plate across the table. At the moment, probably nobody who'd appreciate being called before breakfast. Daniel sat across from her. You know what he means. Yes, she did. That was the trouble. Her sons were not inventing the stairs, the roof leak, or the tractor that coughed smoke on cold mornings. They were not wrong that the house had become too large for one person. They were wrong about when one person had started living in it. Mark touched the bread, but did not eat. The broker works with a group that's interested in larger parcels. If we wait until winter, the market could change. Markets have survived winter before. They're offering serious money in this county. They haven't offered anything. They haven't been here. He knows the acreage. Ruth stopped cutting her ham. Daniel looked at his brother. Mark's thumb rubbed the edge of his plate. Public records give you the acreage. And pictures give him my dining room. That was for the estate people. Which estate? Mom, that's not what I meant. Your father's estate is a pair of boots, 3 good shirts, and a workshop full of jars containing screws nobody can identify. The chairs are mine. Mark pushed back from the table. This is exactly why we wanted to handle the practical side. Every sentence turns into a trap. You should stop walking ahead of me then. He paced to the sink, stopped, and stared outside. The northern rows began beyond the yard, orderly from a distance. Up close, they were a family of crooked backs. Frank had planted the oldest trees when Daniel was learning to walk. He had planted the galas after Mark left for college, though Mark told people the orchard was why he could not wait to leave. Daniel ate half a slice of ham before saying, "Suppose we wait until harvest. Who picks it?" "The crew." "What crew?" "Elena's crew. Dad told me he was short on workers last year." "He was." "And the packing house?" "I'll call them." "With what money?" Mark asked. Ruth looked at him. He softened his voice, which made the question worse. "We know the last couple years were tight. You know what Frank told you? Did he lie?" "No." He rounded. "Up or down?" Whichever direction ended the conversation. Daniel leaned back and studied her. "Do you know what's in the accounts?" "Most of it." "Most?" "I haven't finished going through August." "Then maybe don't promise a harvest until you do." Ruth heard the reason in that. She disliked it enough to respect it. "All right," she said. "I'll go through August." Mark returned to the table but did not sit. "And if it doesn't make sense, then I'll know why." "And Friday, cancel him. He's driving down. Then call before he leaves." "Mom, Mark." His face changed, just slightly. The impatience remained, but something frightened moved beneath it. Ruth had seen that same look when he was 28 and claimed a missed mortgage payment was a bank error. Frank had covered it before she learned the details. The money had come back eventually, in irregular checks accompanied by jokes. "How soon do you need this sale?" she asked. Color climbed his neck. "This isn't about me." Daniel looked from one to the other. "What sale?" Mark snatched up his coffee. "There is no sale. There's a conversation none of us can have, because Mom thinks asking a question is the same as loading her into a van." "What do you need money for?" Ruth asked. "I don't need money." "You've needed money since the first time somebody gave you a wallet. That's nice. It wasn't an insult. It has never once been a compliment." He walked out through the mudroom. The screen door struck the frame hard enough to rattle Frank's cap on its hook. Daniel began to rise. "Let him go," Ruth said. "He drove with me. He'll stand by the truck until he remembers that." Daniel settled back down. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "You know, normal families can discuss property without conducting an autopsy on everybody at the table. Normal families don't bring labels. They were on sale." Despite herself, Ruth laughed. It came out rusty and too loud. Daniel laughed once, then covered his mouth. The two of them sat in the strange quiet that followed, almost embarrassed to have made a living sound in Frank's kitchen. Daniel looked toward the mudroom. "He's in trouble, isn't he?" "He says he isn't." That wasn't my question. It's the only answer I have. Daniel gathered the plates. He had always cleaned when anxious, even as a grown man. He carried everything to the sink and turned on the water. Dad told me not to put another season into this place, he said. Ruth watched his back. When? July? After the sprayer broke. Frank had told Ruth the sprayer only needed a valve. What exactly did he say? Daniel washed the electric knife with more attention than it deserved. He said it was time to get you out from under it. The words entered quietly and found a tender place. Did he say he planned to sell? He said the land would take care of us. Us. Ruth could not tell whether Frank had meant her, the sons, or the whole complicated collection of people who believed the orchard owed them something. Daniel set the knife in the drainer. I don't want to fight you. Then don't make decisions for me. I also don't want a phone call in November saying you spent your savings on apples nobody bought. That would be an embarrassing phone call. I'm serious. So am I. Outside, Mark leaned against Daniel's truck, staring at his phone. Beyond him, sunlight moved across the orchard in strips. One apple dropped from a low branch and disappeared into the grass. Ruth rose. Where are you going? Daniel asked. To look at August. Frank's office occupied a narrow room behind the pantry. It smelled of dust, mouse bait, and the peppermint candies he kept in his top drawer. His desk was buried beneath seed catalogs, invoices, fuel receipts, and a yellow legal pad with 3 phone numbers written sideways along the margin. Ruth sat in his chair. It was the first time she had done so since he died. The August ledger lay beneath a parts catalog exactly where she had left it after the funeral director called. Frank's last figures wandered across the page. Beside the name Bellwether Market, he had written DEP paid. Beneath that were 2 restaurants, the cider mill, and Elena Ruiz, crew, 8 weeks. Ruth ran one finger over the words. Frank had accepted other people's money. He had promised Elena work. He had left the fruit on the trees and the promises in Ruth's lap. She lifted the desk phone and dialed the number she knew without opening the book. Elena answered on the 5th ring, cautious and breathless. Mercer Orchard? It's Ruth. A pause. Then, more gently, Ruth, how are you holding up? Ruth looked through the office window at her 2 sons beside the truck, arguing in low voices while the apples ripened behind them. I don't know yet, she said. That's why I'm calling about the harvest. Elena was quiet long enough that Ruth heard a metal door slam somewhere behind her. I thought Daniel would call, Elena said. Why Daniel? Frank said Daniel would handle things if he couldn't. Ruth looked toward the kitchen. Daniel was still outside with Mark. Frank said a lot near the end. Yes. The single word held no disrespect, only experience. Did he tell you when to start? Ruth asked. 2nd Monday in September, maybe earlier for the galas. That's 6 days from now. I know. And you promised him 8 weeks? He promised me 8 weeks. Ruth sat straighter. There's a difference. There usually is. Voices passed near Elena's end of the call. Someone laughed, and Elena answered in Spanish before returning to Ruth. I took 3 weeks at Wilson's. I couldn't keep everybody waiting after I heard about Frank. I understand. I don't think you do. People ask me every day. They need to know where the work is. Then tell me what you need. An answer. You have one. I'm harvesting. Elena sighed softly. With respect, Ruth, that is not the same as having money. Ruth glanced down at the ledger. She had known Elena for 14 years. They had eaten at the same table dozens of times, attended the same funerals, worked through the same heat. Yet Frank had always been the one who discussed wages, which meant Ruth had been permitted to know Elena personally while remaining ignorant of the part that affected her rent. What did Frank offer? Elena named an hourly rate. It was less than Ruth expected and more than the number penciled in the ledger. Did he put that in writing? He put it in his mouth. Elena, I asked. He said he'd write it when we started. Ruth rubbed her forehead. How many people can you bring? If Wilson lets us leave, 14, maybe 17. Not the 23 Frank wanted. Would 14 be enough? Not if the wind comes. Not if the Rome apples are ready all at once. Not if the tractor is still making that noise. What noise? You know the noise. Unfortunately, Ruth did. Can you come tomorrow morning? I'm at Wilson's until 1. 2 then. Another pause. This one felt different. All right, Elena said. I can walk the blocks with you. I am not promising a crew. I'm not asking you to promise before I can. That's new. The words stung because Elena did not sharpen them. Yes, Ruth said. It is? When Ruth hung up, Daniel stood in the doorway. How much did you hear? Enough to know Dad didn't leave you a clean handoff. He didn't leave me a handoff at all. Daniel stepped into the office, carefully avoiding a stack of Orchard Supply catalogs. Mark says he'll tell the broker not to come Friday. Good. He's going to ask for another date. Then he'll get the same answer with a different date on it. Daniel looked at Frank's chair, then at her sitting in it. You sure you want to do this? No. That seemed to unsettle him more than certainty would have. Ruth pulled the checking ledger toward her. But I want to find out if I can. Those are different things. I'm aware. Mom, if Dad was already lining up a sale, he wasn't. How do you know? Because if your father had lined up anything, there would be 3 maps, 4 copies, and a man in this kitchen wishing he'd never asked about drainage. Daniel smiled despite himself. Frank spoke in futures when the present embarrassed him, Ruth said. You should know that. Daniel's smile disappeared. I do. Outside, Mark opened the truck's passenger door with unnecessary force. Daniel shifted his keys from one hand to the other. Call me before you spend anything. I can call you after. I'm not trying to control you. What are you trying to do? He looked toward the hall where Frank's cap still hung. I don't know. Stop the next bad thing, maybe. Ruth's answer softened before it came out. You can't. I can try. That was your father's favorite mistake. Daniel nodded as though she had confirmed something he wished she had denied. Then he bent and kissed the top of her head. Mark did not come back inside. Through the office window, Ruth watched Daniel cross the yard. Mark said something before Daniel reached the truck, and Daniel stopped. Their argument lasted less than a minute. Whatever Daniel answered made Mark look toward the house. Ruth did not wave. The truck left a pale wake of dust along the drive. By the time it settled, she had opened the August bank statement. The account was not empty. An empty account would have been simple. It contained enough money to encourage one foolish decision or survive several careful months, but not both. Deposits from Bellwether Market and 2 restaurants had arrived in July. Fuel, fertilizer, insurance, and repairs had eaten through most of them. A check to the county had cleared late. 3 invoices remained unpaid, including one from the packing house with final notice stamped across the top. Ruth found a handwritten total on the back of an envelope, added it herself, and discovered Frank had been off by $800. She added it again. He remained off. At 11, she called the packing house. A woman named Nadine transferred her twice before a man came on the line. Mrs. Mercer, he said, with the weary sympathy Ruth had come to recognize as the voice people used when they remembered the funeral halfway through a conversation. I'm sorry about Frank. Thank you. I'm calling about the balance. A keyboard clicked. Yes, ma'am. I can pay part now and the rest from the first delivery. The clicking stopped. Frank already arranged that last season and paid you in January. He still paid. After we carried him 4 months, Ruth wrote January on the legal pad, though she would not need help remembering it. What would you need to take our fruit this year? The old balance and payment on delivery. All of it? I'm afraid so. You don't sound afraid. The man coughed. I'm trying to be clear. I appreciate that. She did not, but he had earned the right to distrust the Mercers without pretending it was personal. The old balance was a little over $6,000. Ruth wrote that beneath Elena's estimated payroll and stared at the 2 figures until they seemed to lean toward each other. The grocery buyer was worse. Bellwether Market's produce manager sounded genuinely sorry, then explained that the company had signed a regional contract in August. Their deposit had not secured the full order. It had reserved the right to inspect. Frank told me the order was set, Ruth said. We discussed volume. You sent money. For the early galas, that's still active if the grading meets our standard. And the rest? I never approved the rest. After the call, Ruth found a copy of Frank's last email to Bellwether. The words prospective volume were underlined twice. On his legal pad, he had written, Bellwether, confirmed. She placed the email and the note side by side. You old liar, she said. The office did not defend him. At noon, she carried a ham sandwich outside and ate it standing beside the orchard lane. Heat shimmered above the grass. Up near the first gala row, red fruit glowed beneath the leaves with the indecent confidence of something that did not know whether it had a buyer. Ruth walked north with a small notebook in her pocket. The first block was better than Frank's record suggested, The trees needed pruning, but the apples were clean and nearly ready. Farther west, she found a collapsed section of deer fence and 3 trees showing rot around old pruning wounds. One irrigation line had split and been patched with wire instead of replaced. Frank's work, most likely. He had trusted wire with the faith some people reserve for prayer. She knelt to inspect the line. Getting down was easy. Getting up required a hand on the tree trunk, and language Frank would have admired. At the Rome block, the air smelled sweeter. Several apples had already dropped. Ruth picked one from the grass, wiped it against her shirt, and cut away the bruised side with the pocket knife she carried. The flesh was crisp and tart, not ready yet, but close. A machine coughed in the distance. Ruth turned toward the equipment shed. The tractor sat where Daniel had parked it after the funeral, half inside the open doors. Frank's old green model, older than both sons, waited beside it beneath a canvas cover. The newer tractor had been bought used 10 years ago and referred to as newer ever since. Ruth climbed into the seat. The key remained in the ignition, though she had told Frank 100 times not to leave it there. She checked that the gear shift was neutral, pressed the clutch, and turned the key. The engine caught, shook hard, and produced a knocking sound like a spoon trapped in a washing machine. "There's the noise," Ruth said. Gray smoke curled from beneath the hood. She turned it off. The silence afterward seemed expensive. Ruth climbed down and pulled the canvas from the older tractor. Dust lifted into her face. Its left rear tire had gone soft. The battery had been removed, and a family of mice had filled the seat compartment with insulation. She stared at the shredded nest. "All right," she told them. "One of us is being evicted." The mice did not appear concerned. Back in the house, Ruth washed orchard dust from her hands and opened the lower cabinet beside the pantry. Behind jars of peach preserves sat a dented cash box. Frank teased her about keeping her jam money separate, though he had borrowed from it twice when the diesel account ran low. Inside were deposit slips, receipts from the roadside stand, and a savings book in Ruth's name. The total represented 9 years of preserves, holiday baskets, and small checks she had refused to let vanish into general expenses. It was not enough to replace a tractor or absorb a failed harvest. It was enough to make trying possible. That frightened her. If the money had not existed, she could have blamed arithmetic. She could have told Elena the truth, returned the deposits, and watched Mark's broker admire the view. The orchard would be sold because Frank had left it too weak to continue, not because Ruth had chosen to stop. She put the savings book on the kitchen table and made herself eat the rest of the sandwich. At 2:02, a white pickup turned into the drive. Elena parked beside the shed and climbed out wearing work boots, jeans, and a red bandana tied over dark hair streaked with gray. She was 60, though Frank had referred to her, and every worker under 70, as one of the younger people. Elena did not come to the house. She stood with her hands on her hips, listening to the cooling tractor. Ruth crossed the yard. "You started it?" Elena asked, for a few seconds. "And it still knows how to stop." Elena walked around the tractor, then bent to look underneath. "Frank said he fixed the knock. Frank said Bellwether bought the whole crop." Elena straightened. Her face answered before her mouth did. "You knew they hadn't?" Ruth asked. "I knew they were arguing. He told me it was settled. He liked that word." Ruth looked toward the orchard. Elena wiped her hands on her jeans. "You want me to tell you it can be done? I want you to tell me what you see." "That may not be the same answer. I'm beginning to understand that." They started toward the gala rose. Elena walked quickly, making Ruth lengthen her stride. At the first tree, she lifted a branch, turned 2 apples in her palm, and bit into a third without wiping it. 4 days, she said. Ruth looked at the fruit above them. "You told me 6. That was on the telephone. What changed?" "I saw the apples." Elena moved to the next tree. 4 days for this block, 7 for the next. The Rome can wait if the wind does. 14 people could start. More would come if the pay is real. It will be. Elena stopped. "Do not say that because you like me. I don't always like you." "Good. Then maybe we can do business." Ruth took out her notebook. Elena named the wage again. Ruth added $1 an hour. For the first time that afternoon, Elena looked surprised. "I can't promise 8 weeks yet," Ruth said. "I can promise the rate, weekly pay, and no waiting until January," Frank would argue. "Frank isn't hiring." "No," Elena said, "he isn't." They continued between the trees, counting what was ripe, what was damaged, and what could still be saved. At the end of the row, Elena pointed toward the equipment shed. You'll need Cal Booker. Cal lost his own orchard. That means he knows what breaks one. Does he repair tractors now? He repairs anything that embarrasses a man too much to take it into town. Ruth wrote down the number Elena gave her. That evening, after Elena left without promising more than 14 workers and 4 days, Ruth sat alone at the kitchen table. The savings book lay open beside the ledger. Daniel called twice. She let the phone ring. On the third call, she answered. Before you say anything, Ruth said, do you still have Cal Booker's number? Daniel was silent. Then he said, how much are you about to spend? I don't know yet. Then the answer is too much. That's not how estimates work. Is the tractor dead? It's coughing with conviction. Daniel exhaled through his nose. Cal's number is in Dad's red address book. I'm in the kitchen, then I'll text it. You could tell me. I don't trust you to write it down while you're arguing. I'm not arguing. You picked up the phone with an opening statement. Ruth glanced at the savings book. I'm hiring Elena's crew. How many? 14 if she can get them. And the packing house? They want the old balance. That's $6,000. You knew? I paid $2,000 toward it in May. Ruth went still. Why? Dad said a restaurant was late paying him. Which restaurant? I don't know. He called. I sent it. Did he pay you back? A pause answered. Daniel, it wasn't a loan. It was money. Yes, Mom, I know what money is. She shut the savings book. You should have told me. When? While he was in the hospital? At the funeral? This morning, while you were making ham and accusing us of invading Poland? I did not mention Poland. The tone did. Ruth pressed her fingers to her forehead. Daniel had sent Frank $2,000 without telling Linda. Ruth was almost certain of that. Not because Linda was ungenerous, but because Daniel spoke differently when his wife knew about a decision. His voice had a firmer bottom. Does Linda know? She asked. That is not the point. Then no. Call Cal. Daniel ended the conversation before she could answer. His text arrived immediately. Beneath Cal's number, he had added, don't agree to anything until he looks at it. Ruth called. Before she could resent the instruction enough to ignore it, Cal answered in a low, distracted voice. Booker. This is Ruth Mercer. Ruth. The distraction left. He offered condolences without decorating them. Ruth thanked him and described the tractor's knocking sound. Gray smoke or black? He asked. Gray. Sweet smell? I didn't taste it. Smell, Ruth. Not especially sweet. Oil light? No. Did the knock speed up when you gave it throttle? I didn't. Good. She found herself pleased by the word. Cal asked 3 more questions, then said he could come after breakfast. Don't start it again. I had arrived at that myself. Frank wouldn't have. No, he'd run it until the bad noise got loud enough to identify. That was his diagnostic method. He was consistent. After the call, Ruth wrote 2 checks. The first covered the packing house balance. The second she left blank except for her signature, then stared at it until good sense returned and she tore it into 4 pieces. She was sweeping the office floor the next morning when Cal's truck rolled into the yard. It was a faded blue Ford with 1 silver door and a toolbox mounted crookedly across the bed. Cal climbed out in clean work pants and a shirt with Booker Farm stitched above the pocket, though Booker Farm had not existed for 9 years. He was 70, broad through the shoulders and stooped slightly on the left. His gray beard looked recently trimmed in a way that suggested someone had reminded him he would be visiting a widow. Ruth met him by the shed. You look well, he said. You look repaired, mostly replacement parts. He opened his toolbox. Show me what you did. I started it. I stopped it. Good repair so far. Ruth showed him the smoke and described the sound again. Cal checked the oil, removed a side panel, and shone a flashlight into places Ruth could not see. He asked her to climb into the seat. You said not to start it. Don't. Turn the key to the first position. She did. A row of lights appeared on the dash. Which one stayed on yesterday? That one. That's the charge light. I know. Frank told me you didn't deal with machinery. Frank told everybody that. Cal glanced up at her, then returned to the engine. Push the fuel shutoff in. It is in. No, that's the throttle. Ruth looked down. He was right. You can enjoy that once, she said. I use mine up. He loosened a line, placed a rag beneath it, and told her to crank the engine without letting it catch. Fuel darkened the cloth. Cal listened with his head tilted. After less than 2 seconds, he raised one hand. Ruth stopped. Injector, he said. Maybe 2. The pump's unhappy, but I don't think it's dead. How much unhappiness can I afford? Rebuilt injectors, filters, lines, labor. 1,500 if nothing else introduces itself. And if it does, 22, maybe 25. Ruth looked toward the orchard. Can you finish by Friday? Friday is rude. The apples aren't. Cal wiped his hands. I can get the injectors this afternoon. You'll help. Does that reduce the labor? No. It reduces the chance you call me every time it hiccups. He walked her through the fuel system, naming each part and making her repeat what it did. When she reached automatically for a wrench, he took it away and gave her the correct size. Frank always used that one, she said. Frank rounded bolts. He rounded everything. Cal gave her a brief look. That include the books? Did people know? People knew Frank. Ruth tightened the first fitting. That is not an answer. It's the answer you're going to get from most of them. They worked until the sun warmed the metal walls of the shed. Cal did not hurry her, but he did not take over when she struggled. Once, when a fitting would not move, he showed her how to lengthen the wrench with a short pipe. Leverage, he said, useful until it breaks something. Did you come here to fix the tractor or offer opinions about my family? Tractor? Families cost more. At 10, Daniel arrived carrying a case of hydraulic fluid. He stopped inside the shed when he saw Ruth on a rolling stool with grease on both forearms. What happened to you? Your mother discovered tools, Cal said. I've owned tools longer than you've had that shirt. Cal looked down at Booker Farm. That's possible. Daniel set the fluid beside the wall. I thought this tractor needed injectors. It does. Then why did you bring hydraulic fluid? Ruth asked. Dad said the loader was drifting. Cal and Ruth both looked at the raised bucket. Daniel followed their gaze. What? Nothing, Cal said. Just deciding whether we want to stand under a machine, Frank maintained. Daniel moved out from beneath it. Ruth tried not to smile. Cal lowered the bucket and returned to the fuel lines. Daniel hovered for several minutes, offering a flashlight nobody needed. Eventually, he removed his watch and began cleaning corrosion from the battery terminals. The three of them worked with an ease that made Ruth uneasy. It resembled older Saturdays, before Frank became ill, when Daniel would arrive before dawn and be handed 6 hours of work, as if it were the price of admission. Frank rarely thanked him. Ruth fed him instead, as though a plate of roast beef settled the account. You don't have to stay, she said. Daniel kept scraping the terminal. I know. Cal's charging me. I assumed. You have work. I move things. Linda won't mind? The scraper stopped. Cal carried a filter outside without comment. Daniel set down the tool. Could you not bring my marriage into every conversation? I asked a question. No, you fired a warning shot. Ruth wiped her hands on a rag. Did you tell her about the $2,000? Yes. The answer came too quickly. When? This morning. And? She said I was an idiot for not telling her in May. That sounds like Linda. She also said you're allowed to make your own decision. Ruth waited. And that I'm allowed to think it's a bad one, Daniel added. That sounds more like Linda. He picked up the scraper again. She wants to come Sunday. For what? To help. With the harvest. With you. Ruth disliked the phrasing. She could not dislike the offer. Tell her to wear old shoes, she said. Cal returned carrying the ruined fuel filter between 2 fingers. This should have been changed last spring. Daniel looked at it. Dad said he changed it. Dad said a lot, Ruth answered. No one spoke for a moment. By noon, Cal had removed the injectors and driven to collect replacements. Daniel stayed to help Ruth lift folded picking bags from the loft. Dust coated the canvas, and 2 straps had been chewed through. How many of these do you need? He asked. 14 to start. You have 9 usable. I can order more. With what money? Ruth turned to him. You have asked me that 3 times, and you haven't answered. My savings. What savings? The preserves. Daniel sat back on his heels. Mom, that's your money. That's generally how savings work. It's what you have if the furnace dies. The furnace is younger than Mark. The roof, then. The roof is not harvesting apples. You know what I mean. Yes. You mean, I may need the money later. You will need it later. Daniel, I am 71. Everything I spend is money I might need later. He looked down at the torn strap in his hands. Ruth lowered her voice. I'm not risking the house. I'm not borrowing. I am paying the packing balance, the crew, and the repair. If the numbers stop making sense, I stop. You paid the packing house already? The check is ready. Don't mail it. Why? Let me look at the buyer agreements first. No. His head came up. You sent your father money because he asked, and he didn't tell me. Now you want the books because you think I'm about to make the same mess. I think you're grieving. So are you. I'm not spending $20,000 to avoid going upstairs. The words landed between them. Ruth stared at him. Daniel's face tightened immediately, but he did not take them back. She climbed down from the loft ladder. Her knees trembled when she reached the floor, from the climb or anger. She would not give him the satisfaction of choosing. I go upstairs every night, she said. His side of the bed is empty there too. I didn't mean, yes, you did. You just didn't mean to say it. Daniel ran both hands over his face. I'm scared you'll put everything into this place because letting it fail feels like letting him die again. Ruth looked toward the open shed doors. The orchard rose beyond the yard, bright and indifferent. What if I put everything into it because I want one decision nobody made for me? Daniel had no quick answer. Her phone rang from the workbench. Elena's name showed on the screen. Ruth answered. I have bad news, Elena said. Wilson offered completion bonuses. 5 people are staying. How many does that leave? 9, if nobody else changes their mind. Ruth looked at the 9 usable picking bags piled at Daniel's feet. When can they start? She asked. Friday. The galas need picking tomorrow. I told you 4 days yesterday. They've had one. Ruth, I cannot make people leave guaranteed work. I know. Beyond the shed, a gust moved through the first row. Leaves flashed their pale undersides. 2 apples dropped almost together. Elena heard the silence. There may be people I can call. How many? I don't know. Call them. Ruth ended the conversation and reached for the red address book she had brought from the office. Daniel watched her turn to the page marked Crew. Mom, he said carefully, Dad hasn't used some of those numbers in years. Then the people who answer will be surprised to hear from me. She dialed the first one. A recorded voice told her the number had been disconnected. Ruth drew a line through it and called the next. The second number belonged to a dental office. Was this ever Lena Crawford's number? Ruth asked. The receptionist said it had been the dental office for 11 years. Then she's overdue for a cleaning. Daniel made a sound that might have become a laugh under better circumstances. The third number rang until a man answered suspiciously. Yes, he had picked for Frank, but not since his shoulder surgery. The fourth belonged to the nephew of a worker who had moved to Arizona. The fifth reached a woman named Patricia Ames, who remembered Ruth immediately and said she could work 2 mornings as long as nobody expected her to climb. Ground picking and sorting, Ruth said. My back can sort. Can it start tomorrow? Patricia considered. What are you paying? Ruth told her. My back just got more flexible. By the 7th call, Ruth had found 1 person. By the 12th, she had 3. Daniel sat on an overturned bucket with Frank's old contact book open across his knees, copying names onto a clean sheet and marking the disconnected numbers. Call Arthur Lowe, he said. Arthur is older than I am. He still works the Christmas tree lot. Christmas trees don't bruise when you drop them. They also don't come down without a saw, Ruth called. Arthur agreed to drive the bin tractor if it ran. His exact words were, if Cal fixed it, yes. If Frank fixed it, no. Cal returned at 3 with the rebuilt injectors wrapped in brown paper. Ruth paid him for the parts, then stood beside him as he showed her how to seat the first one. You want it snug, he said, not punished. Frank believed those were the same thing. He owned a long wrench. Daniel handed Ruth a socket. She caught him watching her fingers. What? Nothing. You're waiting for me to cross-thread it. I'm waiting to see if you ask for help. Bring a chair. That isn't help with the injector. My back doesn't know the difference. He brought the rolling stool without comment. They finished near sunset. Cal primed the fuel system, then made Ruth do it again after she skipped a step. She climbed into the seat and turned the key. The engine cranked. It coughed once, twice, then settled into a hard, steady rumble. No knocking, no gray smoke. Ruth rested both hands on the steering wheel. The sound traveled into the orchard. For years, she had heard Frank start a tractor and understood it as the beginning of someone else's work. This time, The vibration came up through her own boots. Cal leaned against the open panel. Don't fall in love. The loader cylinder still leaks. Daniel held up the hydraulic fluid. I brought something useful. You brought fluid, Cal said. A seal would be useful. Can it pull bins tomorrow? Ruth asked. It can pull empty ones. It can pull full ones if Arthur remembers hills exist. He does Christmas trees, Daniel said. Cal considered that. Then hills have introduced themselves. Ruth shut off the engine. In the sudden quiet, a vehicle sounded on the gravel lane. Mark's sedan appeared between the trees, too clean for the orchard. He parked near Daniel's truck and climbed out carrying a narrow folder. His eyes moved from the open tractor to Ruth's stained clothes. I thought Cal was looking at it. He looked, she said. Cal closed his toolbox. Then she looked. Then the tractor got nervous and cooperated. Mark nodded to him. Sorry about your wife. The words were 9 years late, but Cal accepted them with a small tilt of his head. I'll be back in the morning, Cal told Ruth. Check for leaks before you start it. I know. Knowing is usually when people stop checking. He drove away. Mark waited until Cal's truck disappeared. The broker wants to know if next Wednesday works. No? He has another interested party coming through the county. Then they can enjoy the county. He isn't the enemy, Mom. I haven't met him. You're the one making him unpleasant. Daniel stood, wiping his hands. I told you to cancel. I postponed. There's no harm in getting a valuation. There's harm if she told you no. Mark turned to him. You were on my side yesterday. I'm not on a side. You spent the day repairing the thing keeping this fantasy alive. I cleaned a battery terminal. You always do this. Daniel's jaw tightened. Do what? Become indispensable and then act exploited. Ruth felt the words pass through Daniel before his face closed around them. Enough, she said. Mark opened the folder. I brought comparable sales. That's all. Look at them whenever you want. He placed the folder on the hood of Daniel's truck, as if setting it inside the house might provoke gunfire. Ruth did not pick it up. How much do you need? Mark's eyes flicked toward Daniel. Need for what? Daniel asked. Nothing. You've got a buyer touring the county, and suddenly next Wednesday matters, Ruth said. Your cuff is frayed, you've checked your phone every 2 minutes, and you drove 4 hours on a Thursday afternoon to deliver 3 sheets of paper. I stayed at Daniel's last night. That doesn't improve the cuff. Mark shoved both hands into his pockets. My business had a bad quarter. What kind of bad? The ordinary kind. Daniel looked at him. Evelyn, no? Mark gave a humorless laugh. Great, we're all discussing our partners now. Does she? She knows business is slow. How slow? Ruth asked. Not sell my organs slow, just sell my mother's orchard slow? Mark looked away. The setting sun caught the western windows of the house, turning them orange. Somewhere in the nearest row, an apple struck the ground with a soft, final thump. Mark pulled off his glasses and cleaned them on his shirt. I thought Dad meant it when he said the land would take care of us. So did Daniel, Ruth said. Apparently he thought it meant sending Frank money. Mark looked sharply at his brother. You did what? It doesn't matter. How much? It isn't your business? Oh, now we've discovered boundaries. Daniel stepped closer, but Ruth moved between them. Both men were taller than she was. Neither seemed pleased to notice she had done it. Your father used the same sentence on all of us, she said. That doesn't make it money in the bank. Mark put his glasses back on. You're going to spend what is in the bank picking fruit nobody has agreed to buy. Some of it is sold. Some? Yes. And after harvest? I'll decide after harvest. Based on what? Information I don't have yet. He gestured toward the orchard. This isn't information. This is sentiment with diesel fuel. Ruth almost admired the phrase. Frank would have repeated it to everyone in town. You don't have to agree, she said, but the broker is not coming next Wednesday. Mark's face hardened. You can delay. You can't pretend Daniel and I have no stake in what happens here. Ruth heard the word stake and pictured the narrow wooden supports Frank drove beside young trees, so they would grow in the direction he preferred. You have history here, she said. You have work here. You have wounds here. What you do not have is a payment due from me. Mark flinched. For a moment, Ruth wanted to take the sentence back. Then she thought of the dining room photographs. He took the folder from the truck hood. Fine, leave the sales. You said you didn't want them. I said the broker isn't coming. I can read. Mark handed her the folder. There's an offer range on the last page. From whom? An estimate, based on recent development sales. Then, it is not an offer. No, it isn't. That admission cost him something. He left without entering the house. Daniel watched his sedan vanish down the lane. You didn't have to tell him about the money, he said. You didn't tell me not to. I didn't think I had to. That is what people say after they leave me out of things. Daniel picked up the hydraulic fluid. I'm going home, to Linda. That is generally where home is. Tell her Sunday may be busy. She'll be thrilled you approved her footwear. He put the fluid in the shed and closed the doors. At his truck, he paused. For what it's worth, Mark's business really has been slow. How do you know? He asked me for a loan in June. Did you give it to him? No. Ruth waited for more. Daniel opened his door. Linda knew about that one. After both sons were gone, Ruth carried Mark's folder into the kitchen. She set it beside the savings book, but made herself call the remaining numbers before opening it. 2 people declined. One was working nights and could come for 4 hours in the afternoon. A couple who had picked for Frank 7 years earlier agreed to help through the weekend. Elena called at 9 to say she had found 2 more, though one could only drive and the other refused ladders. That makes 8 for tomorrow, Ruth said, if everyone appears. Will you? I told Wilson I had a dentist. You don't. I might after I finish grinding my teeth. Ruth smiled into the receiver. 8 is not enough. It is more than 0. That is not your most comforting arithmetic. It is still true. After the call, Ruth opened Mark's folder. The numbers on the last page were larger than anything she had permitted herself to imagine, and smaller than the future her sons had apparently spent. Development value, the broker had written, subject to access, soil approval, zoning review, and buyer interest. 4 uncertainties stacked beneath one impressive range. Ruth closed the folder. At 5 the next morning, headlights moved along the lane before sunrise. Patricia arrived first in a rusted station wagon, carrying her own gloves and a thermos the size of a fire extinguisher. Arthur came behind her. The couple arrived separately after an argument about directions. The night worker did not come. Elena stepped from her pickup at 5:20 and counted heads. 7, she said. 7 and me. You are not climbing. I can climb. You can also sign checks. Today that is more important. Ruth looked toward the dark rows. Frank climbed until last year. Frank climbed when he should not. We spent half our time watching him wobble. Nobody had ever told Ruth that. Elena pulled on her gloves. You sort at the trailer. You check bags. You keep Arthur from driving downhill in neutral. I heard that, Arthur said. Good. Hearing is also important. As the sky lightened, Ruth handed out the 9 usable picking bags. There were enough because 2 people had failed to appear. She could not decide whether that counted as good news. Elena gathered everyone at the head of the first gala row. Light color stays, bruised fruit in ground bins. Twist, do not pull. Ruth pays Friday, not when the buyers pay her. Several faces turned toward Ruth. That's right, she said. It became true the moment she said it. Arthur started the tractor. The repaired engine held steady. Elena placed workers through the rows, then pointed to where the first empty bins should go. One of the returning pickers glanced toward the house. Is that where Frank wanted them? Elena looked at Ruth. Ruth felt the question waiting, larger than the placement of bins. Frank isn't running this harvest, she said. Put them where Elena tells you. The first apple came off the tree with a small snapping sound, then another, then dozens, passing from branches into canvas bags while morning opened over the orchard. Ruth stood beside the trailer with her ledger, listening to the trees empty. By 7, listening had become counting. A full picking bag held roughly 40 pounds. A good worker emptied 12 or 13 before the morning break. Ruth recorded each bin, the row it came from, and whether Elena marked it first grade or cider. The numbers rose more slowly than the sun. Patricia sorted at the trailer with Ruth, rolling each apple beneath her palm before placing it in one of 3 crates. This one's pretty, Patricia said. It has a puncture. It has character. Character leaks. Patricia dropped it into the cider crate. You sound like Frank. Ruth looked up. Patricia winced. Sorry. No, you're right. She picked up the next apple and found herself making the same quick turn Frank had taught her decades ago. Stem, shoulder, blossom end, bruise. He had stood behind her then, reaching around her waist with both hands, pretending the lesson required more contact than it did. She had laughed and elbowed him away. Ruth put the apple in first grade. Frank would have called that too small, Patricia said. Frank isn't here to argue. He'd have found a way. That made Ruth smile. At 8:15, Cal arrived with coffee and a cardboard box of donuts. He checked beneath the tractor for leaks, while Arthur complained that the brakes were more philosophical than mechanical. They believe in stopping, Arthur explained. They don't always practice. Cal climbed into the cab. After testing the pedal, he adjusted a linkage and informed Arthur that machinery worked better when a person used the whole foot rather than one nervous toe. "You want to drive it?" Arthur asked. "No, I want to criticize." The crew laughed, and work resumed lighter than before. Ruth watched Cal check the repaired fuel lines. He did not hover or invent another problem. When he finished, he showed her a faint dampness around one fitting. "Not enough to stop," he said. "Tighten it at lunch. You're leaving?" "I have a mower in pieces. I thought you were helping today." "I am helping. I'm preventing you from paying me to stand around and eat Daniel's inheritance." The phrase made Ruth's shoulders stiffen. Cal saw it. Bad joke. Popular subject. He closed the engine panel. People get strange around land. Did they get strange around yours? They got practical. It was the first time he had mentioned Booker Farm without being asked. Ruth waited. Cal looked toward the rows. Practical is what people call a decision when somebody else pays for it. Then he picked up a donut, put $2 on the tractor seat, and left before she could ask who had paid for his. Near 10, one of the new workers emptied a bag too quickly and bruised half the apples against the side of the bin. Elena stopped the row. "Lower the bag," she said. "Open from the bottom. I've picked before. Then you learned it wrong before." The man, Wesley, looked toward Ruth. "Frank let us empty over the top if the bin was low." Elena's face did not change. "Frank is not paying for damage galas." Ruth felt the crew's attention shift. Wesley lifted both hands. "I'm just saying how we did it, and I'm telling you how we do it." Again, he looked at Ruth. Every habit in her wanted to smooth the moment. Frank would have made a joke, let Wesley continue, then complain later about the bruising. Ruth had spent years translating his avoidance into extra sorting. "Elena is running the rows," she said. "Lower the bag." Wesley stared at her for one long second, then lowered it. When he moved away, Elena did not thank Ruth. She should not have needed to. At noon, the crew sat beneath the packing shed awning with sandwiches and donuts. Ruth tightened the fuel fitting as Cal had shown her. When she stood, a bolt of pain traveled from her knees into her hips. Elena noticed. "You are limping." "I'm walking unevenly. That is limping with a college degree." Ruth leaned against the tractor tire. "How far behind are we?" "2 bins." "From what?" "From where I wanted to be." "How do we gain? More people or more hours?" "We don't have more people." "Then ask if they'll stay until 7. "Overtime." "Yes." Ruth calculated wages in her head and disliked the result. Elena tore an orange into sections. "You said weekly pay and a real rate. You did not say people should give you extra hours because they feel sorry for you." "I wasn't going to." "You were thinking loudly." Ruth accepted a piece of orange. "Ask them." 6 agreed to stay. Patricia could not. Arthur said he would stay if someone found better lights for the tractor. Daniel arrived at 1 with 4 portable work lights, 2 extension cords, and enough sandwiches for everyone. Ruth watched him unload. "Did Elena call you?" "Arthur did." "How does Arthur have your number?" "He called the hardware store and asked for somebody who knew the Mercers." "That seems inefficient." It worked. Daniel wore old jeans and the boots Ruth had given him one Christmas. He handed her a turkey sandwich. "You came from work?" "I was working at home. And Linda, at work. She still intends to come Sunday, unless you put her through a background check." Ruth opened the sandwich. "Has she ever picked?" "No." "Then she'll sort." "Is that a punishment?" "Ask Patricia." Patricia raised her thermos. "We reject fruit and men for the same reasons. Too soft, badly shaped, or leaking." Daniel laughed hard enough to cough. After lunch, he took a picking bag and followed Elena into the rows. She placed him on a short ladder beside Wesley. Daniel had worked the orchard for years, but he still waited for instructions. Ruth noticed because Frank never had. By 3, the first 4 bins were ready for the packing house. The truck Frank usually hired was unavailable. Cal returned with his Ford and a flatbed trailer whose boards had gone silver with age. He and Daniel secured 2 bins at a time with heavy straps. Ruth brought the check for the old balance. "I'll take them," Daniel said. I'm going. You've been on your feet since 5. So have you. I'm not 71. I've had more practice. Cal studied them. I could listen to this for free, but the packing house closes at 5. Ruth rode with Cal. His truck smelled of machine oil, peppermint, and the faint damp odor of a coat that had dried too slowly. The radio played old country music low enough that neither had to admit to listening. You didn't need to come, Cal said. Apparently that opinion travels. I mean, they know you there. They knew Frank. Same account. No, Ruth said. That is what I'm going there to change. Cal nodded once. Fair enough. The packing house sat 12 miles away beside the railroad tracks, a long concrete building with loading bays open to the warm air. Forklifts moved between stacks of empty bins. Nadine came out carrying a clipboard. She was a compact woman in her 50s with silver hair cut close around her ears. She looked at Ruth, then at the check. You didn't have to bring this yourself. I wanted to see what I'm paying for. Nadine checked the amount. This clears the old balance. It will. That's not what I asked. It clears tomorrow. Nadine looked at her over the clipboard, then marked the invoice paid pending clearance. A forklift lifted the first bin from Cal's trailer. Several apples shifted, exposing pale shoulders where the color had not developed evenly. Nadine reached in and selected 3. She turned each one beneath the loading bay light. These came off the same row? Yes. Who called the pick? Elena Ruiz. That's good. Ruth did not like the way she said it. Why? Because Frank sometimes picked to meet a bill, and Elena picks to meet a grade. Nadine cut one apple with a small folding knife. The flesh cracked cleanly. She checked the seeds, tasted a slice, and handed the rest to Ruth. Sugar's good. Color is mixed. We can run these tomorrow morning. What percentage first grade? I won't know until they're through. Guess. Nadine looked at the bins again. 65 if the rest looks like the top. Maybe 70. Frank's July projections assumed 82. And the other 30? Juice, processing, or cull. At what price? Nadine told her. The processing rate barely covered picking. Cull fruit cost money to haul away. Cal stood beside the truck, saying nothing. Ruth ate the apple slice. It was crisp, sweet, and worth less because sunlight had reached one side more than the other. Run them, she said. Nadine signed the delivery slip. Bellwether's inspector is coming tomorrow afternoon. I thought they inspected after packing, not this year. New regional standards. Did Frank know? They sent notices. Ruth thought of the office desk buried under catalogs. What will they look for? Color, size, pressure, visible defects. They've been strict. How strict? Nadine's expression turned sympathetic. Ruth disliked that more than numbers. On the drive home, Cal waited 3 miles before saying, 70% is not bad. It is if you budgeted 82. Did you? Frank did. You aren't Frank. Everybody keeps telling me that when it costs money. Cal drummed 2 fingers against the steering wheel. You could sell seconds at the stand. The stand hasn't been opened properly in 6 years. It still has a roof. So does the equipment shed. Nobody drives up asking for a bag of injectors. You make preserves. Preserves do not consume 30 tons of apples. No, but people who come for preserves sometimes buy apples. Ruth looked out at the farms passing in long green and brown strips. Did advice help when you had your orchard? Nothing helped enough. The answer closed the subject without bitterness. When they returned, 6 workers were still picking. Daniel had strung the portable lights along the first row. Their white glare looked unnatural beneath the darkening leaves. Elena met Ruth at the trailer. How bad? 65 to 70% first grade. That is not bad. It is not 82. Frank's numbers? Ruth nodded. Elena took the delivery slip, scanned it, and handed it back. Frank could grow first-grade apples on paper during a hailstorm. They worked until 7:15. The last bin came in under artificial light, and Arthur parked the tractor without striking anything more valuable than an empty crate. Ruth gathered the crew beside the trailer and handed out checks. Each person opened the envelope, not rudely, but because experience had taught them to verify promises before driving home. Elena checked hers last. You included the overtime, she said. You worked it. That was not always Frank's interpretation. Ruth's face warmed. If he owed you money, he does not. Not anymore. The words carried a boundary. Ruth respected it. After everyone left, Daniel helped her cover the sorted crates. The orchard beyond the lights had gone completely black. You should go inside, he said. In a minute. Her phone rang on the trailer table. Nadine's number appeared, though the packing house had closed. Ruth answered. I wanted to catch you before morning, Nadine said. Bellwether moved the inspection up. Their buyer will be here at 8. We won't have the next bins until noon. They're only inspecting today's delivery. 2 bins? That's what they requested. Ruth looked at the dark rows still heavy with fruit. And if they don't take them? She asked. Nadine hesitated. Then their deposit buys the early fruit they already received, she said. They won't be obligated to take another apple. Then ask them to inspect the next block. They won't come to the orchard. Why not? Because they're buying packed fruit, not trees. They're deciding whether to buy fruit they haven't seen. They're deciding whether Mercer Orchard fits the contract they already have. Ruth pressed the phone harder against her ear. That sounds like deciding not to buy. I thought you should be prepared. Nadine's kindness made it impossible to argue with her properly. Thank you, Ruth said. She ended the call and found Daniel watching her. What happened? Bellwether is inspecting at 8. They may not take anything after today's bins. Daniel glanced toward the covered crates. How much of the crop did Dad think they were buying? Most of the galas and half the roams. Actual number, 40 tons. Daniel looked into the dark orchard as if 40 tons might appear differently once named. We should stop, he said. The fruit is ready. If there's no buyer, 2 restaurants have deposits down. For how much? Not 40 tons. Then don't pick 40. Ruth gathered the loose delivery slips into her ledger. Elena says the next gala row will start dropping if we wait. Dropped fruit is a loss. So is paying people to pick apples we can't sell. Yes. The agreement irritated both of them. Daniel unplugged the work lights. Darkness reclaimed the row, 1 section at a time. Go to the inspection tomorrow. I plan to. I'll come. No. Mom. I don't need you standing behind me looking alarmed every time somebody says a number. I can look calm. You look like Frank when you try. It makes people defensive. Daniel wrapped the first cord around his elbow. That may be the first time you've compared me to him as an insult. It wasn't an insult. It has never once been a compliment. Ruth recognized Mark's words from the kitchen and saw Daniel recognize them too. He looked away first. At 7:40 the next morning, the packing house smelled of apples, wet concrete, and hot machinery. Ruth stood beside Nadine as fruit rolled from the washer onto a moving belt. Under bright lights, every flaw became visible. Workers in rubber aprons pulled out apples with bruises, punctures, poor color, or the wrong size. Good fruit continued toward the grater. The rejected pieces dropped into a lower chute with dull, irregular knocks. Ruth watched one apple she would have eaten without hesitation disappear into the processing bin. Pressure mark, Nadine said. From picking? Could be a branch rub. The bellwether buyer arrived at 8:12, carrying a tablet and wearing white-soled shoes too clean for the loading floor. His name was Scott Pelham. He apologized for being late, put on a hairnet, and began selecting apples without introducing any unnecessary conversation. Ruth followed him through the inspection. He measured diameter, checked color against photographs on his tablet, and pressed a small gauge into the flesh. He was not rude. Ruth almost wished he were. The sugar is good, he said. Nadine nodded. I told you, color's uneven. Warm nights, Ruth said. They didn't cool down enough. Scott looked at her. Mrs. Mercer? Yes. Sorry for your loss. Thank you. He returned to the fruit. Sympathy completed. Business resumed. The final grade was 68%. Better than Nadine's lowest guess, worse than anything Frank had written in his projection. Scott approved the 2 bins at the contracted early season price. Ruth felt relief rise before he added, that will fulfill the reserve. What about the remaining galas? We're full on regional volume. You haven't inspected the remaining galas. It's not a quality issue. Then why put us through a quality inspection? For these bins. You could use more. I'm sure the fruit is marketable. That is a beautiful sentence for fruit you won't buy. Nadine lowered her clipboard. Scott removed his hairnet. Our store's consolidated suppliers. Frank and I discussed it in July. He wrote that you confirmed 40 tons. I never confirmed 40. He took your deposit for early reserve. He understood something else. Scott's face showed the faint strain of a man being asked to defend a conversation with someone who could no longer contradict him. I'm sorry, Ruth believed him. It did not help. What would make you take another load? She asked. A shortage from one of our contracted growers. Are you expecting one? No. So I should hope someone else has bad weather. I wouldn't phrase it that way. You don't have to. I did. He offered his card and left. Ruth stood beside the moving belt until all the Mercer apples had passed beneath the lights. Good fruit went one direction, processing another, waste a third. Nothing argued for the category it had been given. Nadine handed her the grade report. You got a fair inspection, I know. Scott isn't the one who changed the buying program. I know that too. Knowing doesn't seem to be improving your morning. It has been an overrated week for knowledge. On the way home, Ruth called the 2 restaurants from her truck. The first, Kerrigan House, confirmed its order, but needed only 60 bushels. The chef asked if Frank had recorded their preferred size. Frank recorded medium, Ruth said. Not too large. We use them whole. I know. I packed them last year. The chef paused. Right, of course. Ruth confirmed delivery and ended the call before he could apologize. The second restaurant had changed chefs. The new one would honor the deposit but wanted half the volume Frank had discussed. Ruth agreed because arguing could turn half into none. Elena was waiting beside the trailer when Ruth returned. How much? She asked. 2 bins. No more unless another grower fails. Elena muttered something in Spanish. Was that about Scott or Frank? Yes. The crew stood scattered between rows, waiting to know whether work continued. Ruth looked at the trees. Yesterday's picking had barely opened a space in the first block. Thousands of apples remained, each moving toward ripeness, whether she had somewhere to send it or not. How much can the restaurants take? Elena asked. Maybe 3 bins between them. The cider mill? I'll call. Roadside? Cal already started that sermon. He is right. That doesn't improve it. Elena waited. Ruth understood that everyone was watching again, not for grief, age, or weakness. They were watching to see whether the checks they had cashed yesterday would be the last. Pick for the restaurant orders, Ruth said. Best color, medium size. Stop after 3 bins. Then we move to the rows we can leave another week. And the ripe fruit, we sort it for the stand. The stand is closed, then I'll open it. The roadside stand stood near the lower drive, a small white building with green shutters and a roof that sagged over the left corner. Frank had stopped opening it regularly after a supermarket began buying their full crop. He disliked sitting there for hours to sell 10 bags and hear 20 people explain that apples cost less in town. Ruth unlocked it after lunch. Dust covered the counter. Wasps had built a gray nest above the back window. A cardboard sign reading, Honey Honor Box remained propped against the wall, though no honey had been sold there in years. Beneath the counter, Ruth found paper bags, a cash drawer containing 43 cents, and a faded apron printed with red apples. She tied the apron around her waist. Patricia leaned in through the service window. You expecting a crowd? I'm expecting you to clean the shelves. That apron gives you authority. It gives me pockets. They swept, washed the counter, and carried out 2 warped display tables. Arthur repaired one shutter with screws from a coffee can in his truck. By 4, the stand looked less abandoned than merely unsuccessful. Ruth filled 6 bags with second-grade galas and wrote a price on a piece of cardboard. A woman in a silver SUV slowed, read the sign, and continued driving. Patricia watched her go. First customer. She didn't stop. First critic then. The next vehicle did stop. A man bought 1 bag, asked after Frank, and paid with a $20 bill. Ruth had no change. He waited while Patricia searched her purse and Arthur emptied his pockets onto the counter. Between them, they found $13 in bills and enough quarters to finish the transaction. You're running smooth, the man said. Tell your friends, Ruth answered. By closing time, they had sold 9 bags. The total did not cover one worker's afternoon wages. Ruth counted it twice anyway. Daniel and Linda arrived Sunday morning, while she was arranging jars of preserves on the shelves. Linda crossed the drive, carrying 2 folding chairs under one arm and a cooler in the other. She was 50, with short brown hair, narrow glasses, and a calm face that made strangers confess things to her. Daniel followed with more paper bags and a printed sign. You made a sign? Ruth asked. The sign read, Mercer Orchard, fresh apples, preserves, open. The lettering on yours looked angry, Daniel said. It was readable. It looked like a ransom note. Linda kissed Ruth's cheek. I told him not to say that. You said wait until after she sees the new one. I was managing timing. Ruth inspected the sign. It needs prices. We can add them. And hours. We can add those. And the apples aren't all fresh. Some have been off the tree 2 days. Daniel turned to Linda. This is why advertising lies. Linda set down the cooler. Good morning, Ruth. Good morning. You look tired. So do you. I am. Now, neither of us has to pretend. Ruth almost smiled. Linda had always possessed the unnerving ability to be gentle without surrendering ground. Daniel began hanging the sign. Ruth told him it was crooked. He adjusted it twice before Linda took the hammer from him and said, "Go sort apples before one of you becomes a widow." At the trailer, Ruth showed Linda the grading system. Linda examined 3 apples, placed 2 correctly, and put a punctured one in first grade. Character, Patricia called from the stand. Character leaks, Ruth and Patricia said together. Linda moved the apple. Daniel worked beside Elena in the rows. He accepted instruction, kept pace, and did not look toward Ruth for approval. Near noon, he emptied a full picking bag into the bin and immediately reached for the next tree. Ruth watched him longer than she meant to. Linda noticed. He told me about the 2000. I'm sorry. Why? Because Frank asked him. Frank asked, Daniel decided. Ruth ran a cloth over an apple that was already clean. He was always the one Frank called, I know. He thought being needed meant being valued. Linda placed another apple in the processing crate. So did Frank. The truth of it made Ruth's hand stop. Linda did not soften the sentence. Daniel wants to help you, but if you let him turn this into his responsibility, he will hate the orchard, himself, and eventually me. In that order. I didn't ask him to come. No, you only make it impossible to stay away. Ruth looked toward the row where Daniel worked. What would you have me do? She asked. Give him a job with an ending. Before Ruth could answer, a truck pulled into the stand. Then another car slowed behind it. The new sign, for all its offensive neatness, could be read from the road. Patricia waved from the window. Ruth, bring change. We've become a commercial enterprise. For the next hour, the stand stayed busy enough that no one could continue an honest conversation. They sold bags, jars, and 3 bushels to a woman making sauce. The cash drawer filled with small bills. Ruth found herself laughing when Arthur tried to charge one customer twice and blamed the apron for confusing him. Then, a familiar sedan turned onto the lower drive. Mark parked beyond the customers and stepped out. He watched Daniel carry apples to the stand, Linda make change, and Ruth tie another paper bag. He did not look angry. He looked excluded. Ruth tied the top of the bag and handed it to a customer before looking at him again. Mark waited until the woman had carried her apples away. Am I interrupting? Yes, Ruth said. We're selling apples. I can see that. Then you're not interrupting very much. Linda came around the counter and hugged him. Mark accepted it awkwardly, one arm still pinned by the leather folder he carried. Did Daniel tell you we'd be here? She asked. No. Daniel emerged from the stand with a crate of preserves. You said you were going home. I did. Then I came back. For the broker? Ruth watched Mark's expression close. For Mom, he said. Daniel set down the crate. She's been here the whole time. Linda stepped between the sentence and its likely answer. We need someone to handle cash. Patricia looked offended. I handle cash. You tried to give a customer $14 change for a 5. He looked honest. Linda turned to Mark. You're good with numbers. Mark glanced at Ruth. Am I allowed to touch the family fortune? It's mostly ones, Ruth said. She lifted the apron over her head and handed it to him. He stared at the red apples printed across the front. No, it has pockets. I have pockets. Not enough. Patricia tied the apron around Mark before he could retreat. It sat too high on his waist and barely reached his thighs. You look trustworthy, she said. I look like I lost a bet. The two are not mutually exclusive. The next customer bought 2 bags and a jar of peach preserves. Mark counted the change correctly. Within half an hour, he had moved the jars to eye level, arranged the brightest apples at the front, and begun asking people whether they wanted 1 bag for eating and another for sauce. You're charging the same price, Ruth said. I'm selling 2. They might not need 2. They decide that, after you suggest it. That is generally how selling works. Frank had considered suggestion a form of begging. He had set prices, sat in a chair, and waited for people to recognize the opportunity. Mark smiled at strangers, remembered their names, and persuaded one man to buy 6 jars for office gifts. Ruth disliked how effective he was. Near one, Linda opened the cooler and set sandwiches on the stand counter. Elena brought the crew down in shifts so the rows would not be left empty. Mark continued selling while he ate. Daniel sat on an overturned crate, his shirt dark with sweat. "How long are you staying?" Mark wiped mustard from the corner of his mouth. "I don't know." "You drove 4 hours without knowing?" "I've driven farther for less." "That is true," Ruth said. Mark looked at her. "Was that a joke?" "I haven't decided." For a few minutes, they ate without fighting. Traffic passed on the road. A breeze moved through the open shutters, carrying the sweet, dusty smell of the orchard. Linda asked Elena how much they had picked. "Almost 5 bins since Friday," Elena said, "plus the stand." "That sounds good," Mark said. "It is slow. How many are still out there?" "Too many." Mark looked toward the trees. The calculation appeared in his face before he could hide it. Ruth folded the waxed paper from her sandwich. "The cider mill may take some." "May? I'm calling them after lunch." "And if they don't?" "The apples do not turn into land by Tuesday." Nobody spoke. Linda closed the cooler. That sounded rehearsed. "It has been a repetitive week," Ruth said. Mark removed the apron. "Can we talk somewhere that doesn't have an audience?" "Everybody here knows you want the orchard sold. Not everybody knows why." Daniel looked up. "Do we?" Mark's jaw worked once. "Apparently Mom has decided I'm insolvent. I decided you need money. You supplied the panic. I'm not insolvent." "Then tell us what you are," Daniel said. Mark glanced at Elena and the workers eating beneath the trees. "Not here." Ruth led him to the equipment shed. Daniel started to follow, but she stopped him. "If he wants you, he'll ask." Mark did not. Inside, the air held heat from the metal roof. The tractor stood between them, its repaired engine ticking softly after the morning's work. Mark set his folder on the hood. "I have a line of credit renewing next month." "How much?" "Enough. That number is becoming popular. 48,000. Ruth let the figure settle. "Business debt?" "Yes. All of it? Most." "What is the rest?" He looked down at the folder. "Cards." "Does Evelyn know?" "She knows about the line." "And the cards?" "She knows we have cards." Ruth closed her eyes briefly. "That was not my question." "No, she doesn't know the total." "Why not?" "Because every month I thought the next contract would fix it." "What kind of contract?" "A hotel renovation." The owner delayed twice, then canceled. Ruth knew Mark's company supplied fixtures and interior finishes for small commercial buildings. He had once joked that he sold expensive ways to wash your hands. She had not understood how much of his own money sat between an order and payment. "Can the business survive?" she asked. "If I get through October, and if you don't, I close. Sell inventory, negotiate what's left." "That sounds painful." "It is not a crime. I didn't say it was." "You looked at me like Dad used to." Ruth considered denying it. "Your father gave you money because he wanted the problem gone. I'm asking because I want to know what it is." Mark looked away. "Evelyn needs to know," she said. "I didn't come for marriage advice. You came to sell my land to pay a debt your partner doesn't know about. I came because Dad told me the orchard was our security. He told all of us that. And you believed him." "Yes." "Then why am I the only one being treated like a thief for believing it now?" The question struck its target. Ruth sat on the rolling stool beside the tractor. "You are not a thief." Mark's face tightened. "Thank you. You are behaving like a man who thinks urgency gives him permission. Maybe because nobody else feels the urgency. I do. I have workers expecting pay. Buyers who disappeared, fruit ripening faster than I can move it. I feel urgency before I put my shoes on. Then sell. No. Why? Because I have not finished." "Finished what?" Ruth looked at her grease-darkened hands. "Finding out." Mark paced toward the shed door. "Finding out whether you can do Dad's job, whether it was ever only his." He turned back. She had not meant to say it aloud. Once said, it explained more than she wanted him to know. Mark leaned against the doorway. "You think he didn't value what you did? I think he valued it where nobody could see it. That's not the same thing. No, it isn't." For a moment, they stood on the same side of Frank's absence. Then Mark picked up his folder. "I'm not asking you to close tomorrow. I'm asking you not to kill a real opportunity because you need to prove something to a dead man." Ruth rose. "And I'm asking you not to spend my answer before I give it." When they returned to the stand, Daniel watched their faces but did not ask. Mark put the apron back on and sold apples until 3. Ruth called the cider mill from the office. The owner, Ben Harlan, could take 8 tons of processing fruit over the next 3 weeks, possibly 10 if his tanks emptied on schedule. The price was low enough to hurt, but high enough to cover picking and transportation. "I can't promise more," Ben said. 8 is 8. You'll need to deliver. I have a trailer. You have that little flatbed Cal uses. That's not a trailer. That's lumber traveling in formation. It held 2 bins. And how many trips do you want to make? Ruth wrote hauling beside the price and underlined it. Her next call went to Pike Valley Produce, a wholesaler Frank had stopped using after an argument about grading. A man named Omar Keene answered. He remembered Mercer Orchard and, more surprisingly, remembered Ruth's preserves. "My wife bought a case every fall," he said. "Then your stand stopped opening." "It's open now." Frank said direct sales weren't worth the trouble. Frank is no longer making that calculation. Omar went quiet. "I heard. I'm sorry. Thank you." He could not pay Bellwether's price, but he might take 10 to 12 tons if the fruit held up. He wanted samples from each block, grade reports, and assurance that Ruth could supply on schedule. "When do you need the samples?" she asked. "Tomorrow. I'll bring them. Frank used to bring me whatever was pretty and tell me the rest looked the same. I'll label the rows." Omar laughed. "Then I'll look at them." Ruth ended the call with a cautious satisfaction she did not trust. 10 tons was not 40. 10 tons, however, had a number attached to it that was not 0. She returned to the stand and found Mark folding the apron on the counter. The rush had ended. Daniel and Linda were carrying empty crates toward the trailer. "I have to go," Mark said. "Thank you for helping." He seemed surprised. "You were good at it," Ruth added. "I'm better when the inventory fits in paper bags. Tell Evelyn." His expression cooled. "I will, today. I heard you the first time." He walked to his sedan. Before opening the door, he looked beyond the stand toward the back acreage. "The broker's soil consultant is nearby, Tuesday," he said. He could check the west section without bothering anyone. Ruth stared at him. "Check it for what?" "Drainage, road suitability, preliminary things." "You told him he could?" "I said the family was considering a sale. The family is not the owner." His hand remained on the car door. "It would be 2 small core samples." "You gave a stranger permission to dig into my orchard?" "It's the back field, not the trees. It is my ground." Mark's face shifted from defense to impatience. "This is information, Mom. You said you wanted information. Cancel it. He has already scheduled the equipment. Cancel it. You're being unreasonable." Ruth stepped closer. "If anyone comes onto that field Tuesday, I will send them away in front of you." Mark's mouth flattened. "Do you understand?" she asked. "Yes." "Say it." "I understand." He got into the car and shut the door. Gravel snapped beneath his tires as he left. At the edge of the west field, sunlight caught something bright. Ruth walked past the stand and down the lane. A strip of orange survey ribbon had been tied to the fence post. 50 feet farther, another marked the grass. She pulled the first ribbon free. Mark had not merely scheduled a visit. Someone had already been there. A second ribbon marked a shallow groove in the grass where a truck tire had passed. Ruth followed it to a bare patch near the fence. Someone had pushed a narrow metal probe into the ground and left a round hole no wider than her thumb. Linda caught up with her first. "What is that?" "Information," Ruth said. Daniel came behind, carrying the last empty crate. He saw the ribbon in Ruth's hand and swore. Did Mark do this? He didn't hold the probe. He sent them. Ruth took out her phone. Mark answered from the road. "I'm driving. Pull over." "What happened? You know?" He went silent, then said, "They only marked possible test locations. They took a sample, a surface sample. It's not invasive. It is when you didn't ask. I thought they were coming Tuesday. Then why were they here? The consultant had another property nearby. He may have stopped to save time. You gave him permission. I gave him permission to look. You did not have permission to give. Mom, it's a spoonful of dirt." Ruth stared at the dark little opening in the ground. "Cancel Tuesday. Give me his name and number. So, you can threaten him? So I can tell him the owner said no." Mark breathed into the phone. "Fine. And you are done arranging anything connected to this property. Fine. Not until the harvest. Not until I decide. Done. I heard you. You heard me at the shed." He ended the call. Daniel held out his hand. "Give me the number when he sends it." "No." I'll make sure they stay off the land. I can make sure. Mom, he crossed a line. Yes. And you're going to do what? Pull up the ribbons? Ruth yanked the second strip from the fence. I have started. Daniel looked as if he wanted to break something more expensive than ribbon. Linda took the crate from him. Go move the chairs, she said. I don't need a task with an ending right now. That is exactly when you need one. Daniel stared at her, then walked back toward the stand carrying both folding chairs at once. Ruth looked at Linda. You told him that? I tell him many things. Some arrive late. Mark texted the consultant's information 10 minutes later. Ruth called the man, who apologized and confirmed that no further work would occur without her direct approval. He had collected one shallow sample for texture and marked 3 possible locations for later testing. Ruth told him to discard it. He sounded relieved to do so. By the time she returned to the stand, Mark's customers had gone and the afternoon traffic had thinned. Patricia counted the cash drawer. Ruth took the display apples from each block and placed them in separate bags for Pike Valley produce. Elena inspected her selections. This one has sunburn. I wanted him to see the worst acceptable fruit, show the best acceptable fruit and the worst. Otherwise, he thinks the worst is average. Ruth added 2 more bags. And label everything, Elena said. I know. You labeled that one Gala North. That is where it came from. There are 6 North rows. Ruth rewrote the label. Elena smiled slightly. You are learning. I liked you better when you needed a check. You did not. That evening, Daniel offered to drive Ruth to Pike Valley in the morning. She refused. He argued until Linda put both hands on his shoulders and turned him toward their truck. Your job ended, Linda said. Daniel pointed at Ruth. Call me after the meeting. I'll consider it. That means she won't, he told Linda. I speak Ruth. After they left, Ruth removed the orange ribbons from the remaining posts. She filled the sample hole with loose dirt and pressed it flat with her boot. The gesture changed nothing, but she slept better for having done it. Pike Valley Produce operated from a warehouse behind an abandoned feed store. Trucks backed into 3 loading bays, and stacks of blue plastic bins filled the yard. Omar Keene met Ruth at a folding table inside, where a scale, pressure tester, and cutting board had been arranged beneath fluorescent lights. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with a white mustache and an expression that suggested every piece of fruit had disappointed him personally. You brought honest samples? He asked. I brought labeled samples. That wasn't my question. You'll find out. He began with the northern galas. He weighed, measured, cut, tasted, and wrote figures on a sheet. Ruth stood across from him without filling the silence. Frank used to talk while I tested, Omar said. He talked while most people worked, made it difficult to think. That was sometimes the purpose. Omar looked at her, then returned to the apple. Did you know why we stopped buying? He said you changed the grade after delivery. He sent mixed bins. Top layer was pretty. Middle looked like apples he found beside the road. Did you reject them? I downgraded. He called me a thief. That sounds like Frank. You believe me? I believe he wrote confirmed beside a buyer who had not confirmed anything. Omar set down his knife. I liked him, you know. So did I. The words rested between them, without requiring either person to make Frank better than he had been. Omar finished the samples and tapped the northern label. These I can use. Not premium retail, but good independent store fruit. I'll take 8 tons to start. You said 10 to 12. I said might. What makes 8 become 12? Consistency. Delivery on Tuesday and Thursday. No hidden seconds. Same range as the samples. I can do that. Can your crew? Yes. Do you have bins? You do. Omar leaned back. Frank still owes me 3 blue bins. Are they in his records? Probably not. Then count them against the load. He studied her for a moment, perhaps deciding whether she had offered too little or more than expected. I'll send 10 empties tomorrow morning, he said. First load Tuesday afternoon. We weigh here. Price? He named one below bellwether and above processing. Ruth asked for 3 cents more per pound. Omar laughed. Frank sent you to negotiate? No, he kept me home. The laughter stopped. Omar offered 1 cent more. Ruth accepted and made him write it down. She called Daniel from the truck before leaving the yard. Well, he answered, 8 tons, possibly 12. At what price? She told him. That's not bad. It is not enough. It's also not 0. Elena has infected everyone with arithmetic. Daniel was quiet for a second. Did you talk to Mark? Yesterday. I mean, since. No. He called me last night. What did he want? To complain mostly. Then he asked whether you'd found another buyer. Ruth felt a small uneasiness. What did you tell him? That you were taking samples to Pike Valley. Why? Because he asked. I thought maybe he'd stop pushing the sale if he understood this was working. It is not working yet. Mom, he's our brother, not a competing orchard. Ruth looked at the blue bins stacked outside Omar's warehouse. I have to go. Back at Mercer Orchard, Elena accepted the order without celebration. 8 tons by Thursday, she said. That is work. Can we do it? With 14 people, yes. We have 11 today. Then you sort less and pick more. You said I wasn't climbing. You can pick from the ground. Ruth spent the afternoon beneath low branches, twisting apples by their stems and placing them gently into a half bag. Her shoulders began burning before the first hour ended. Elena passed once, adjusted the strap across Ruth's back, and continued without comment. The weather radio in the shed predicted a cold front Tuesday night, with gusts possibly reaching 40 miles an hour. Arthur listened while refueling the tractor. Possibly means 50. Possibly means possibly, Ruth said. It means the Weather Service doesn't own apple trees. Elena changed the picking order. They would finish the exposed northern rows before moving to the sheltered block. Ruth approved 2 hours of overtime and watched another figure disappear from her ledger. Cal came after supper with extra straps for the flatbed. When Ruth told him about Pike Valley, he walked around the trailer and kicked each tire. This will carry 2 full bins if we replace that bearing. When? Tonight. How much? You always ruin congratulations. Congratulations don't have invoices. He named a price. Ruth agreed. They worked beneath the shed lights. Cal made her pack grease into the new bearing herself, then told her she had used too much. You said fill it. I didn't say bury it. Specificity is a kindness. So is stopping before you use the whole tube. The blue bins were supposed to arrive by 9 the next morning. At 10:30, the yard remained empty. Ruth called Pike Valley. Omar answered on the second ring, his voice guarded. I held the truck, he said. Why? I got a call about your property. Her hand tightened around the phone. From whom? Your son. Which son? He said the orchard was being evaluated for sale and asked what happened to our agreement if ownership changed before delivery. Ownership is not changing. That isn't what he implied. Mark has no authority to speak for Mercer Orchard. He said he was protecting everyone from a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding is his. Omar sighed. I don't need to be caught between a family and 12 tons of fruit. You have a written purchase agreement. For the first 8, subject to delivery, I have not canceled it. Then send the bins. I want confirmation there will be fruit Thursday. I am confirming. From the person signing, yes. I also need to know nobody is going to stop my truck or argue that the apples were promised elsewhere. Ruth looked toward the north block. Picking bags were filling. Without the blue bins, Elena had begun emptying fruit into the few wooden bins left from the previous season. 2 were already full. I'll call you back, Ruth said. Mark answered immediately. I only asked him a question, he said before she spoke. You called my buyer. I called the number Daniel gave me. Daniel did not give you permission to interfere. I wasn't interfering. I wanted to know whether you'd signed something that could complicate a sale. There is no sale. There is interest. Your interest. And the broker's. Ruth heard wind move across the phone at his end. Here, in the orchard, the leaves had begun showing their pale undersides again. You delayed my bins, she said. That wasn't my intention. It was the result. Tell Omar there's no problem. You told him there was. Then I'll call him back. You will not call anyone connected to this orchard again? Mom, not a buyer, not a worker, not a consultant, nobody. I am trying to protect what Dad left us. Ruth looked at the wooden bins overflowing beneath the trailer awning. Your father left me work, she said. You keep turning it into permission. She ended the call. At noon, Omar agreed to send the bins after Ruth faxed a signed delivery schedule. The truck would arrive by 4. At 4:15, the first hard gust swept through the north rows. The blue bins had not come. The gust lifted the corner of the tarp covering the wooden bins. Patricia grabbed it before it cleared the trailer. Elena! Elena turned at the sound and began shouting names. Workers came out of the rows carrying half-full bags, shoulders bent against the wind. Empty carefully, she ordered, then secure the ladders. Another gust struck before the first bags were unloaded. Apples thudded against the canvas. One rolled from the trailer, crossed the packed dirt, and vanished beneath the shed. In the north block, leaves churned silver green. Branches whipped against one another. The sound was not like wind through trees. It was like water rushing over stones. Arthur drove the tractor toward the shed with an empty bin dragging crookedly behind him. Front came early. "We noticed," Patricia shouted. "Ruth called Omar. The truck left 20 minutes ago," he said. "It should have been here hours ago." "I know. Call the driver. I'm calling now." The line went dead. Elena pulled Ruth away from the trailer as a ladder toppled where she had been standing. It struck the ground, bounced, and slid beneath a tree. "Everyone inside the packing shed," Elena yelled. "We need to cover the fruit. We need people without broken heads." The crew abandoned the rows. Daniel's portable work lights swung from their cords, though no one had turned them on. Cal ran from the equipment shed, carrying rope. "Get the tractor in," he called. Arthur backed it beneath the roof. Cal lowered the loader, then helped him drag 2 wooden bins against the sheltered wall. There was nowhere to put the loose fruit still on the trailer. Patricia and Wesley threw a second tarp across it, while wind snapped the fabric from their hands. Ruth climbed onto the trailer to reach the far corner. Elena caught her belt and pulled. "I can reach it." "So can Wesley. I'm lighter. That is not an advantage in wind." Wesley crawled across the trailer, secured the rope, and jumped down. The tarp ballooned once, then held. A branch cracked in the nearest row. Everyone turned. It was not a large branch, but the sound traveled through Ruth's chest. Fruit poured from it as it fell, dozens of apples striking the ground in a soft, terrible cascade. Then the rain began. They crowded into the packing shed, wet shoulders pressed together. The open doorway framed the orchard like a picture being shaken. Apples dropped singly at first, then in clusters. Some struck the tin roof and rolled off. Others collected in the grass beneath the trees. Ruth tried to count them until the numbers became obscene. Cal stood beside her. "Nothing to do out there now. There is always something. Not that improves it." A horn sounded from the lane. Headlights appeared through the rain, high and yellow. The Pike Valley truck came slowly toward the yard, carrying 10 blue bins. The driver stopped short of the shed and climbed out, coat whipping open. "I can drop them, but I'm not loading anything in this," he shouted. "Drop them under the awning," Ruth said, forklift sliding. Cal went outside before anyone could stop him. He guided the driver onto the packed gravel, then helped set the bins as close to the building as possible. Rain ran from his beard. By the time the truck left, the blue bins stood empty within 20 feet of fruit that could no longer go into them. Another set of headlights turned into the drive. Daniel's truck arrived first. Mark's sedan followed. Daniel got out without a coat. He crossed the yard toward Mark before Ruth understood what was happening. "You called the buyer?" Daniel shouted. Mark shut his car door. "I fixed it." "You fixed the thing you broke?" "I got the bins sent. They were supposed to be here this morning. I didn't know the weather would change." Daniel shoved him. Mark stumbled against the sedan, recovered, and pushed back. "Don't touch me." Daniel drew one arm back. Ruth stepped between them. "Daniel." He stopped with his fist clenched beside her shoulder. Rain ran down his face. "Move! No!" He did this. The wind did this. He delayed the bins. "Yes." Mark pointed toward the blue stack. "They're here." "Now," Daniel said, "after half the block is on the ground. I made a phone call. I did not order a storm. You called Mom's buyer because you're scared she'll save the orchard. I'm scared she'll spend everything and leave us to clean up after." The words silenced even Mark. Ruth looked at him. "Leave." His anger faltered. "Mom, go. I came to help. You came because the result became visible. That's not fair. No, it isn't." Rain struck the shed roof in hard sheets. Behind Mark, the orchard moved wildly in the dark. He lowered his voice. I panicked. The broker said active contracts could delay a sale, and I thought if Omar knew, panic explains why you did it. It does not make me responsible for accepting it. I can stay and pick up whatever falls. "No." Daniel stepped to Ruth's side. His fists had opened, though every line of him remained tight. Mark looked from him to the crew gathered inside the shed. Elena, Patricia, Arthur, Wesley, Cal, adults who had no place in the Mercer family's shame and had been dragged into it anyway. "You're throwing me out in front of everybody," Mark said. I asked privately. You ignored me privately. His face went pale. Ruth's voice shook, but she did not lower it. Do not come back until you can enter my home without treating my death like a business deadline. I don't want you dead. You keep spending what happens afterward. For a moment, Mark looked younger than he had in years, not innocent, simply struck. He got into his sedan. Daniel took one step after him, then stopped. Mark backed through the yard, turned at the lane, and disappeared into the rain. Ruth returned to the shed. No one pretended not to have heard. Elena handed her a dry towel. The lights went out in the house. I know. You should sit. I'm not going to fall. That was not the only reason. Ruth sat on an apple crate. The worst wind lasted less than an hour. By dusk, the rain softened and the branches ceased lashing. The crew walked the first rows in waterproof jackets, using flashlights to assess what remained. The site was quieter than the storm, and therefore worse. Apples carpeted the grass beneath the exposed trees. Some were unmarked. Others had split on impact or been driven into the mud. 2 overloaded limbs had broken. One younger tree leaned at an angle, roots lifted along one side. Elena crouched, picked up an apple, and turned it in her hand. Processing if we gather tomorrow, she said. Not retail. How much fell? Maybe 400 bushels. Maybe more. Nearly 10 tons. Ruth looked toward the full canopy beyond, where most of the crop still held. And what we picked. If the tarps stayed tight, it is good. The tarps had stayed tight. The 3 wooden bins and loose fruit on the trailer were wet only along the edges. They could be transferred into Pike Valley's blue bins and delivered. One success sat inside a much larger failure. Daniel stood near the broken branch, soaked through. I'm sorry. For what? For telling Mark about Omar. You didn't know what he would do. I should have. That is what people say when they want guilt to feel like control. He looked at her. Ruth had heard Cal say something similar about practical decisions. She was beginning to collect other people's truths, now that Frank no longer supplied all of them. Go inside and find candles, she said. I can stay. Your job has an ending. Daniel glanced toward the drive where Mark had disappeared. That isn't funny. No. He went to the house. Ruth called Ben Harlan at the cider mill from beneath the shed awning. She told him what had fallen. How clean? He asked. Tree fruit that met grass and rain. No mud? Some mud. I can't take mud. We'll sort. I told you 8 tons over 3 weeks. I know. My tanks are half full. How quickly can you press? Ben hesitated. If I move a pair run, what would it cost? Cost me or cost you? Both. He gave her a price almost 20% below the one they had discussed. Ruth closed her eyes. At that price, picking fallen fruit would barely cover wages. Leaving it would mean rot, wasps, and no income at all. I'll bring you 4 tons tomorrow, she said. I can take 3, 4, 3.5, done. Her next call went to Kerrigan House. The chef could use another 20 bushels for sauce if the fruit was washed and sound. He offered less than fresh market price, but more than cider. Bring it whole, he said. We'll peel here. Ruth wrote the number on her damp legal pad. Daniel returned carrying lanterns. Cal took one and went to inspect the leaning tree. Elena called each worker who had left early, asking whether they would return at dawn for ground sorting. All but one said yes. Pay is the same, Elena told them. No piece rate. Ruth pays for hours. Ruth heard her own promise being extended and did not object. They worked another hour transferring the picked galas into the blue bins under lantern light. Daniel lifted. Arthur drove. Patricia sorted. Nobody spoke about Mark. When the final bin was covered, Ruth found Cal beside the leaning tree. He had braced it temporarily with rope tied to the tractor's drawbar. Can it be saved? She asked. Maybe. Roots tore. Helpful answer. It's an honest one. She touched the wet trunk. The bark felt cold beneath her palm. Cal looked toward the ground covered in apples. You don't have to gather all of it. Yes, I do. No. You choose what costs less to leave. That sounds practical. It is. Ruth withdrew her hand. Who paid for that decision at your orchard? Cal looked into the darkness. My wife was sick. I paid until there wasn't anything left that could pay. I'm sorry. So am I. Still doesn't make every apple worth saving. At dawn, the grass shone beneath a clear sky, as if the storm had cleaned something instead of breaking it. The crew arrived carrying gloves, buckets, and sore bodies. Ruth placed the restaurant fruit in clean crates, cider fruit in the blue bins, and ruined apples in a separate pile. Elena surveyed the ground. "We need another category," she said. "For what?" "Fruit good enough to eat, too ugly to ship, and worth more than cider." Ruth looked toward the roadside stand. Patricia followed her gaze. "Storm special?" "No," Ruth said. "People hear special and think cheap. What do we call it?" Ruth picked up a scuffed gala, wiped it on her sleeve, and bit into the unmarked side. It was cold, crisp, and sweet. "Orchard apples," she said. "They look like they came from one." Patricia printed orchard apples on the cardboard in letters large enough to read from the road. Beneath it, she added, "Ugly outside, good inside." "That sounds personal," Arthur said. "It describes most of the crew." Ruth priced the bags below first grade, but well above cider. She refused Patricia's suggestion to add after the storm. "We're selling apples, not weather," she said. "People like a story. They can get one when they ask why the apples are scuffed." People did ask. They also bought. The stand could not absorb tons, but it moved 30 bags before noon. Linda called from work and ordered 10 more for people who had heard about the damage. The woman who had bought sauce apples returned with a friend and filled the back of her SUV. None of it resembled a grocery contract. Each sale, however, kept fruit out of the cider bin. In the rows, the work went slowly. Everyone had to bend, inspect, lift, and sort. By 10, Patricia's back had lost the flexibility it had discovered when Ruth quoted the wage. Ruth assigned her to wash restaurant fruit beside the shed. "Promotion," Patricia said. "It has a chair, executive position." Daniel loaded 3.5 tons for the cider mill with Cal. The flatbed carried 2 bins per trip, which meant they spent most of the day on the road. Cal charged Ruth for fuel and 1 hour of labor, though he worked 5. She changed the invoice. "What's this?" he asked when she handed it back. "Your actual time. My time included arguing with Ben." "That was work. I enjoyed it." "Then consider the extra money punishment." Cal looked at her, folded the invoice, and put it in his pocket. "You're difficult to help. You keep confusing help with a discount." Ben Harlan accepted the first load, but rejected a layer of fruit from the bottom of one bin because mud had worked into the stem cavities. "We can wash it again," Ruth said. "You can scrub each apple with a toothbrush, and I still can't put dirt through my press." The rejected fruit returned to the orchard. Ruth watched Arthur dump it onto the coal pile. 200 pounds slid from the bin, apples striking one another, skins splitting. Every piece had been lifted from the ground, sorted, washed, loaded, driven, inspected, and returned. Work did not become valuable merely because people had done it. She crossed the weight from her ledger and did not send anyone to wash it again. Kerrigan House took 22 bushels. The chef came himself in a white delivery van and inspected the fruit beside the stand. He selected one apple, cut away a bruised shoulder with Ruth's pocket knife, and tasted it. "These will make good butter," he said. "I make apple butter." "Then you know, mine has less clove than yours." The chef looked offended. "Mine has the correct amount. People shouldn't be able to identify spice from the parking lot." He bought 2 jars of hers, along with the apples. That evening, the stand cash covered the day's restaurant fruit washing and most of the extra sorting wages. Cider proceeds would cover the gathering. None of it repaired the damage, but the damage had stopped growing. Ruth sat at Frank's desk after supper and entered every check, sale, fee, rejected pound and gallon of fuel. She used actual numbers even when they ruined a satisfying total. At the bottom of the page, the harvest showed a loss, not a fatal one. Not yet. The phone rang. Mark's name appeared. Ruth let it ring until the machine answered. His voice filled the office. "Mom, I talked to Evelyn. About all of it. She's angry, but she knows. I'm not asking you to call me back. I just wanted you to know." He paused. "I'm sorry about Omar. And the soil people. I know saying I was scared doesn't fix it." The message ended. Ruth remained in Frank's chair. She was relieved Mark had told Evelyn. She was still angry. Both conditions occupied her without canceling each other. She wrote Evelyn knows in the margin of her ledger, then crossed it out because it was not an orchard expense. Pike Valley's first load went out the following afternoon. Omar inspected it while Ruth waited beside his table. He chose samples from the middle of each bin rather than the top. "Consistent," he said. "I told you. People tell me many things. You should improve your acquaintances." He approved the load at the written price. Payment would arrive in 10 days. What about the other 4 tons? Ruth asked. If Thursday looks the same, I'll take them. The Romes will be ready next week. I can use some Rome. How much? Do not sell me apples that are still on trees. That is how advance orders work. That is how arguments begin. They settled on another sample inspection, which Ruth wrote down and made him initial. When she returned home, Daniel was repairing the work lights. One cord had frayed where it rubbed against a branch. I told you not to leave those strung up, he said. You told Elena. She told me she told you. She did not. She said you would claim that. Ruth carried the Pike Valley weight slip into the shed. Omar accepted the full load. Daniel looked up. All of it? All. That's good. He may take 4 more tons. That's very good. It is adequate. Daniel shook his head. You win one and immediately insult the prize? Your father celebrated projections. I am waiting for checks. He also celebrated checks. He celebrated Tuesdays if he could find an audience. Daniel laughed. Then he looked toward the orchard, where the storm-damaged rows showed patches of bare branches among the leaves. How far behind are you? Ask Elena. I'm asking you. 5 days, maybe 6. I can stay through Friday. What about work? I took vacation. You use vacation for the orchard? I had days. That is not the point. Then what is? Ruth went to the office and returned with an envelope. Daniel stared at it. What's that? Your pay? No. You worked the picking days, repaired equipment, and made deliveries. I'm not taking money from you. You took it from Frank in work instead. His face hardened. That's different. Why? Because he was my father. I'm your mother. Exactly. Ruth held out the envelope. I paid everybody else. They need the money. You don't know what they need. I know you need it more. That does not make your hours free. Daniel did not take the envelope. Ruth set it on the tractor hood. You told me Frank called you whenever he needed work and never let you decide anything. I am not going to repeat that because family labor makes the harvest look profitable. This isn't about profit. It has to be partly about profit. Otherwise, the orchard eats people. Daniel looked at the envelope as if it contained an accusation. I came because I wanted to, he said, and I'm grateful. Paying me doesn't look grateful. What does it look like? Like you're keeping the books clean. I am, he flinched. Ruth lowered her voice. Your life is not orchard equipment. Daniel looked away toward the open shed door. Frank had treated Daniel's weekends as a natural resource. Ruth had watched it happen, fed him afterward, and called that love because she did not know how to challenge the arrangement without challenging Frank. Apology did not return those Saturdays. I should have said something years ago, she told him. Daniel's mouth tightened. About what? About your father calling every time something broke. About you coming even when you were angry. About me making dinner and pretending that settled it. It wasn't your job to stop him. No. It was my job to notice you. The shed seemed to grow quieter around them. Daniel picked up the envelope. This feels ridiculous, he said. You'll survive? I'm buying Linda dinner with it. Good. And I'm telling her you made me take it. She'll believe that. He put the envelope into his back pocket. I'm still staying through Friday. You can ask Elena for a schedule. That earned Ruth a look, but he nodded. The Romes began showing full color 2 days later. Unlike the galas, they were dense, red, and patient. Their block lay partly sheltered by the western rise, so the storm had taken less fruit there. Elena cut one open at the trailer. The seeds were browning, but not dark. 3 days, she said. Can we finish Pike Valley first? Yes, if everyone stays. And after the Romes? Elena looked toward the oldest rows. After the Romes, you have late fruit, cider fruit, and trees that should have been removed 5 years ago. Frank said they had one more good season. He said that 5 seasons. Ruth walked with her to the western block. The ground there was uneven, the irrigation poor. Several trunks bore patches of dead bark. Fruit hung sparsely on branches that consumed the same labor as fuller trees. How many acres would you keep? Ruth asked. Elena stopped. If it were mine? Yes? Is this a trap? No. Elena considered the land. The North Galas, the sheltered Romes, the young mixed block near the house. Maybe 4 acres. Out of 12. 4 good acres can pay. 12 tired acres can keep everyone busy while losing money. Ruth looked across the orchard. She had always measured its value by how much work it demanded. Frank had too. If a thing exhausted them, it must matter. What would you do with 4? She asked. Manage them differently. How? Prune for quality. Replace trees slowly. Sell more direct. Do not promise fruit before looking at it. You sound as if you've thought about this. I manage other people's orchards. Thinking is free. Would you want to manage this one? Elena's expression closed slightly. For wages? I don't know yet. Then do not ask me to answer yet. Fair was fair. They continued into the oldest rows. Ruth counted dead limbs, low yields, and leaking lines. For once, she did not imagine Frank beside her defending each tree. At the far edge, the orchard opened onto the west field, where Ruth had removed the orange ribbons. The ground looked unchanged. The test hole had disappeared beneath pressed grass. Ruth could sell that tired land. The thought came without betrayal. Then she looked back toward the productive blocks, where Daniel and the crew moved between red fruit and green leaves. She could keep some, too. The idea followed Ruth back through the rows. 4 acres sounded small when spoken beside 12. It sounded enormous when she pictured pruning them, hiring for them, and selling their fruit without pretending her body was 30 years younger. At the trailer, Elena took the next full picking bag from Daniel. You're twisting before you lift, she told him. I'm using my legs. You are making a face that says otherwise. My face is private. Your back will be public when we carry you out. Ruth watched Daniel adjust his stance. Elena corrected him once more, then moved on. He did not argue. Are you enjoying this? He asked Ruth. Very much. The last Pike Valley load matched the samples closely enough that Omar agreed to 4 tons of Romes the following week. He still inspected every bin, still chose apples from the middle, and still spoke as if approval caused him physical discomfort. Color is better, he said. Cooler nights, size varies. Trees do that. Frank would tell me he grew the small ones for people with small hands. Frank said, whatever delayed a lower price. Omar signed the weight slip. You don't? I ask for a higher one directly. That is less entertaining. Entertainment costs extra. He paid the agreed price. The restaurant orders went out. Ben Harlan pressed the storm fruit and accepted 2 additional tons of ordinary seconds. The stand never produced a crowd, but traffic became steady enough that Ruth opened it every afternoon and hired Patricia to manage it when the crew worked late. Patricia bought a new cash box and labeled the sections because Arthur's approach to change remained philosophical. Each evening, Ruth entered the numbers at Frank's desk. The loss narrowed. On one page, it became almost invisible, then reappeared after tractor fuel, replacement picking bags, and another week of wages. Ruth stopped trying to make each day prove the entire harvest had been wise. The weather cooled. Galas disappeared from the branches. Red Romes filled the blue bins, and the exposed rows became a pattern of bare limbs and remaining leaves. Ruth's body measured every day. Her right knee swelled. Her fingers stiffened around the first coffee cup each morning. Once, after crouching to inspect a bin, she had to ask Patricia for a hand up. Patricia pulled without comment. Thank you, Ruth said. You're welcome. I'm not fragile. I didn't say you were. You didn't make a joke. I can, if you need one. Ruth did not. Cal repaired the young tree damaged by the storm, cutting torn roots clean and bracing the trunk with 2 posts. He refused to promise it would survive. It will decide in spring, he said. Trees don't decide. Then spring decides. Spring isn't a person. You're hard to comfort. I wasn't asking. Cal packed his tools. That's another thing people say when they are. Ruth paid his invoice without correcting it. He had charged every hour this time. Near the end of the Rome block, Elena found Ruth studying the western rows again. You are still thinking about 4 acres, she said. Yes. Thinking is free. Not the way I do it. Ruth walked to the nearest tree and touched a strip of loose bark. If I kept 4, I would need someone to run field operations. You would need many things. I'm speaking about 1. Elena waited. I could lease the productive blocks, Ruth said, not give them away. Not ask anyone to work for hope. A real lease with time to build toward buying if it works. Buying what? The 4 acres. Eventually? Elena's face revealed nothing. You have been talking to a lawyer? No. A bank? No. Then you are offering me a sentence. I'm asking whether the sentence is worth turning into numbers. Elena looked across the block. Workers moved between the trees, their voices softened by distance. I do not have money to buy an orchard, she said. I didn't ask whether you had it today. Frank once offered to let me buy equipment through my wages. Ruth had not known. What happened? He valued a sprayer at twice what it was worth and called the difference an opportunity. I won't do that. I know you believe that. The caution hurt more than refusal would have. Ruth nodded. Think about it after we finish. You are assuming we finish. We are close enough to become arrogant. Elena smiled despite herself. That sounds like Frank. No. Frank became arrogant before he started. The final section was the oldest Rome row, a thin strip along the western edge where fruit had ripened unevenly. Elena scheduled it for Saturday. The forecast promised clear weather and a cold morning. Friday night, Ruth made payroll at the kitchen table. The savings book lay beside the cash ledger. She had spent more than she intended and less than Daniel feared. Deposits expected from Pike Valley, and the restaurants would cover the remaining bills. If the final fruit graded near Elena's estimate, Ruth would finish with a small gain. Small enough to disappear if the tractor needed a tire. Large enough to prove the harvest had not been a funeral conducted outdoors. The refrigerator hummed. Frank's list remained beneath the insurance magnet. Diesel, shear pins, aspirin, call Elena. Ruth took it down. The paper left a clean rectangle on the refrigerator door. She carried it to the office and placed it in the top drawer, beneath the peppermint candies. She did not throw it away. She did not need to keep looking at it either. At dawn, frost silvered the grass. The crew arrived wearing jackets and knit caps. Breath showed in pale clouds as they gathered at the trailer. Patricia brought coffee. Arthur complained that cold made the tractor's brakes more opinionated. Cal checked the engine and found nothing requiring repair, which disappointed him enough that Ruth accused him of becoming sentimental. Daniel arrived before the sun cleared the trees. He had stayed through Friday as promised, gone home for one night, then returned. You were paid through yesterday, Ruth told him. I'm volunteering today. I don't accept volunteer labor. Linda paid me. For what? Leaving the house before I reorganized the garage. That sounds like Linda. He took a picking bag from the trailer. She'll come for supper. Work first. Yes, ma'am. Elena sent the crew into the row. Ruth took her place at the sorting table. The cold made every apple feel harder, its skin almost polished beneath her fingers. They had been picking an hour when Mark's sedan stopped along the road. He did not turn into the drive. Ruth saw him through the bare sections of the row, sitting behind the wheel. Daniel saw him too. His picking slowed. Keep working, Elena called. Daniel twisted an apple too hard. The spur broke from the branch. I said twist, not punish. He lowered the fruit into his bag and kept working. Mark remained by the road for nearly 20 minutes. Then he drove into the orchard, parked beside the closed stand, and got out. He wore work boots Ruth had never seen and a canvas coat too new to be warm. He approached the trailer without his leather folder. Daniel came out of the row. Elena intercepted him with an empty bag. Row 7. I need a minute. You need a bag. Elena. Ruth spoke before he could continue. Row 7, Daniel. He looked at her, then at Mark. Finally, he took the bag and returned to the trees. Mark stopped several feet from the sorting table. Can I help? Ruth examined an apple, found a bruise, and placed it in the cider crate. Does Evelyn know you're here? Yes. All the debt? Yes. What did she say? A great many things. Are you still living in the house? So far. Ruth picked up another apple. Mark put his hands into his coat pockets. I'm not asking about the sale. Good. I'm not asking you to forgive me. Also good. I thought there might be work. Ruth looked toward Elena. Elena pointed to the far end of the trailer. Drops go into cider crates, not rotten fruit, not split. If there is mud in the stem, coal. Mark nodded. All right. No ladder, Ruth said. I can climb. I didn't say you couldn't. He walked to the far end of the row and began gathering dropped apples. It was the least important job available. It kept him away from the pickers, the tractor, the buyer's bins, and every decision. Mark did it without complaint. At mid-morning, Daniel emptied his bag and watched Mark carry a half-full crate toward the trailer. He's sorting too slowly, Daniel said. He's new, Ruth answered. He worked here growing up. He avoided working here growing up. That's true. Daniel reached for an apple in Mark's crate and inspected it. This one's cull. Mark took it back. It's scuffed. It's split near the stem. I don't see it. Daniel pushed his thumbnail gently against the skin. The split opened. Mark placed it in the coal pile. Neither man apologized. They worked side by side for several minutes, Daniel checking fruit while Mark gathered. Then Elena ordered Daniel back into the row. He went. By noon, sunlight had burned away the frost. Linda arrived with lunch. She hugged Ruth, greeted Elena, and handed Mark a sandwich without surprise. Evelyn made it, she told him. Mark looked at the sandwich. You saw her? This morning. How is she? Angry, I know. Also scared, I know. Linda kept hold of the sandwich for 1 second longer. Knowing is not the finished part. Mark nodded. She let go. They ate beneath the shed awning. Conversation moved around machinery, weather, and how many bins remained. Nobody mentioned the broker. Nobody mentioned inheritance. The last tree stood near the end of the western fence, crooked and sparse. Elena left it for Ruth. You said no ladders, Ruth reminded her. All the fruit is low. There were 11 apples. Ruth twisted the first from its branch. Daniel held the picking bag open. Mark stood several feet away with the cider crate. Neither tried to take the work from her. The final apple hung at shoulder height. Its color was deep red on one side and yellow near the stem. A small scar crossed the skin. Ruth placed her palm beneath it and turned. The stem released cleanly. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Arthur called from the tractor. Are we finished or posing? Elena laughed. The crew began moving again. The final bins went to the trailer. Pike Valley fruit was covered and strapped. Cider fruit stood separately. Ruth checked the counts against her ledger, while Daniel and Cal secured the load. Mark carried the last coal crate to the pile. When he returned, Ruth held out an envelope. He stared at it. What is that? Your pay. I was here 4 hours. You worked 4 hours. I don't want it. Neither did Daniel. Daniel looked up from the trailer. Take it. She becomes unbearable. Mark accepted the envelope. He did not put it in his pocket. Mom, he said, I am sorry. Ruth closed the ledger. I know. That's all? That is what I have today. His eyes shone, but he nodded. The final truck pulled away under a clear afternoon sky. Everyone watched until it turned beyond the orchard lane. Ruth looked at the emptied rows, the tired trees, the stand, and the farmhouse beyond them. She had her answer now. She could run the orchard. She no longer believed that meant she had to keep all of it. That evening, folding tables were set beneath the packing shed awning. Linda brought 2 pans of baked pasta. Patricia contributed a salad mostly composed of cheese. Cal appeared with a pie he claimed to have made, though the grocery store label remained stuck to the bottom of the tin. No one asked you to lie, Ruth said. I transferred it to my own plate. That is not baking. It is presentation. Elena arrived last after checking that the Pike Valley load had been accepted. Omar had approved the weight, including every bin, and promised payment on schedule. The crew applauded. Elena raised one hand. Do not clap until the check clears. Ruth laughed. You have been spending too much time with me. Mark stood near the end of the table, uncertain where to sit. Linda moved her purse from the chair beside Daniel. Neither brother commented. Mark took the seat. They ate while the cold settled over the empty rows. Arthur told a story about Frank driving the old tractor through a fence and blaming the fence for being difficult to see. Wesley insisted the fence had been lying down already. Patricia said that only improved Frank's argument. Ruth listened to people remember her husband without polishing him. Frank was generous, vain, funny, impossible, hard-working, careless with promises, good during storms, poor at apologies, and convinced that every machine contained one more season if struck in the correct place. No single version erased the others. When the plates had been cleared, Ruth distributed the final payroll envelopes. Elena counted hers at the table, then nodded. Every hour, she said. Every hour, Ruth confirmed. Mark watched the exchange. He had not opened his own envelope. Before leaving, he placed it beside Ruth's ledger. I said you worked, she told him. I know. Use it for what Omar still owes. Omar owes me, not you. I don't want to be paid for showing up once, then show up again. He looked at her. Not tomorrow, Ruth added. I intend to sleep. Mark put the envelope into his coat. All right. It wasn't forgiveness. It was an appointment he would have to keep. After everyone left, Daniel helped Ruth carry the leftover food to the house. At the kitchen door, he glanced toward the orchard. So, what happens now? I closed the books. I meant after that. I know. She did not answer until every deposit had arrived, every fuel receipt had been entered, and the last packing fee had cleared. She sat at Frank's desk with the ledger, calculator, savings book, and a sharpened pencil. The harvest had paid the workers, satisfied the buyers, covered repairs and packing, and replaced most of what Ruth had taken from savings. After every expense, it left a gain small enough that Frank would have rounded it into a triumph, and Mark would have rounded it into failure. Ruth wrote the exact number. Then she called her sons. They came the following Sunday. Mark's sedan had a handwritten "for sale" notice in the rear window. "Evelyn's idea?" Ruth asked. "Mutual decision." "That sounds negotiated. Everything is negotiated now." Daniel brought coffee, but no boxes. They sat at the same kitchen table where Ruth had told them the orchard would not be sold before harvest. Mark placed the broker's folder between them. "The development group is still interested." "I know. They increased the estimate. It is still an estimate. They'll make an offer if you allow the full soil study." "No." Mark's hand tightened slightly, then relaxed. "Okay." Daniel looked at Ruth. "Are you keeping the orchard?" "Part of it." She spread a map on the table. It was an ordinary county parcel map, not one of Frank's hand-drawn versions. Ruth had outlined the farmhouse, stand, and 4 productive acres in blue pencil. The western field and oldest blocks were marked in yellow. "I'm keeping this," she said, touching the blue. "The galas, sheltered roams, young mixed block, house, and roadside access." "What happens to the rest?" Daniel asked. "I'm offering it to Marlon and Teresa Vance." The Vances farmed peaches and pears on the adjoining property. Their equipment already traveled past Mercer's western boundary, and they had asked Frank twice whether he would sell the tired field. Frank had answered that a Mercer did not cut up Mercer land, then complained for years about maintaining ground that earned nothing. "They can't match the development price," Mark said. "No." "How far off?" Ruth told him. Mark leaned back. The difference was enough to make silence feel crowded. "You'd leave that much money on the table?" he asked. "I would accept enough money from someone who intends to keep farming." "You don't owe the land a future." "No. I owe myself one." Mark looked toward the window. Ruth waited for the argument. She saw it arrive in his face, meet whatever conversation he had been having with Evelyn, and stop. "What will you do with the sale money?" he asked. "Replace my savings, repair the house, and keep the rest for living." Daniel nodded. Mark's eyes remained on the window. "So, there won't be a distribution?" "No." "All right." The words came rough, but they came. Ruth reached across the table and touched his wrist. "I will sit with you and Evelyn. I'll help you look at the business accounts if you want. I know invoices, I know late buyers, I know what happens when hope gets entered as income. I could use money more than bookkeeping, I know." He looked at her hand. "I'm not rescuing you with the orchard," she said. "I know that too." Mark turned his wrist and briefly squeezed her fingers. "Come Tuesday." Evelyn made a spreadsheet, and we're already fighting about what counts as inventory. Does it exist? Mostly. Then she's probably right. Daniel smiled into his coffee. The Vances walked the yellow acreage with Ruth and Elena. They did not pretend the oldest trees were valuable. Marlon wanted to remove most of them and improve the drainage. Teresa intended to keep one healthy row of roams until their new plantings matured. Their first price was too low. Ruth said so. Their second remained low. Ruth brought Frank's production records, corrected with actual packing grades and expenses. Teresa brought equipment costs. They argued over fencing, irrigation, and who would remove the dead trees. It took 6 weeks to reach a number. The developer's broker called twice during those weeks. Ruth listened, declined, and did not apologize. Mark canceled his relationship with the broker himself. He told Ruth afterward instead of asking for praise. The sale to the Vances closed during a gray January rain. Nothing about it felt miraculous. Ruth signed her name until her hand cramped, paid ordinary fees she resented, and came home with less money than the developer had suggested and more than she needed to continue. The western field was no longer hers. That night, she stood at the kitchen window expecting to feel cut open. Instead, she felt the strange lightness of setting down a basket she had carried so long she had forgotten it could be removed. She still cried. Both things were true. Elena required longer negotiations. "I will not lease trees you decide how to manage," she said. "Fine. You do not hire my crew. Fine. You do not promise fruit to buyers without asking me. I have recently become religious about that." Elena ignored the joke. "Repairs above a certain amount belong to the owner." "What amount?" they argued. "Purchase credit must be written," Elena said. not something we remember differently later. Yes, and I choose what gets replanted, with a budget, with reality. That is usually a budget. They sat in the orchard office with coffee cooling between them. Ruth's proposal became Elena's counter-proposal, then a draft reviewed by people whose services both women paid for. The final lease gave Elena control of field operations and the crop, while Ruth received steady rent and a percentage from stand sales. Part of each year's rent could count toward a future purchase at a price set by an ordinary appraisal when Elena was ready. No one called it an opportunity without attaching numbers. At the signing, Elena read every page twice. "You trust me?" Ruth asked. "I trust the pages." "Good." Elena signed. Daniel's first visit after the agreements were finished occurred on a Saturday afternoon. He arrived carrying a pie and no tools. "Cal's influence?" Ruth asked. Linda bought it, more honest than Cal. They drank coffee in the kitchen. Daniel did not inspect the tractor, roof, or accounts. When Ruth asked him to replace a loose hinge at the stand, she named the job, he completed it, and they were finished. Mark's business did not recover in October. He and Evelyn closed the showroom, sold inventory at a loss, and negotiated the remaining debt. They sold the sedan. Mark took contract work for another supplier, a choice he described as temporary until he stopped needing to describe it. Ruth helped them sort invoices on 3 Tuesday evenings. She did not write a check. He came to the orchard twice that spring. The first time, he repaired paper bag racks in the stand. The second, he arrived with Evelyn and worked an afternoon removing storm-damaged limbs under Elena's direction. Cal's braced young tree survived on one side. Half its branches leafed out, the other half remained gray. "Ugly," Ruth said. "Alive," Cal answered. "Barely. Trees don't care about impressing you. They cut away the dead side and left the rest." When blossoms opened across the 4 acres, Ruth could see gaps where tired rows had once extended toward the west. Beyond the new boundary, the Vances removed dead trees and began preparing the ground. The view was different. It belonged to the life in front of her. By the next harvest, the roadside stand had a new green roof and shelves built by Mark. Above the service window hung a painted sign, Mercer Ruiz Orchard. Elena had objected to the order of the names. "The road already knows Mercer," Ruth said. "We are not paying to educate traffic." Beneath the sign, jars of peach preserves and apple butter carried a smaller label, Ruth Mercer. The apple butter still had less clove than Kerrigan houses. On the final evening of the season, Ruth sat behind the counter while Elena counted the cash drawer. The last crate of Rome's rested beneath the window. Daniel arrived first. Mark came a few minutes later in Evelyn's car. They helped carry the folding tables inside and closed the shutters. Neither asked whether Ruth had considered moving. When the stand was locked, Ruth reached into the crate and chose 2 apples. She gave one to each son. Mark polished his against his sleeve. Daniel bit into his immediately. They walked with her toward the farmhouse through the cold evening, carrying nothing she had not chosen to give.